We're going to call our December meeting to order and have Secretary Review call the roll.
Regent Bartel. Regent Baling. Regent Bradley. Regent Drew. Regent Evers. Regent Falbo. Regent Higgins.
Here.
Regent Rybar. Here. Regent Menedee. Regent Milner. Regent Pointer. Regent Pruitt. Regent Roberts.
Here.
Regent Smith.
Here.
Regent Tyler. Regent Vasquez. Regent Walsh.
Here.
Regent Whitburn. A quorum is present.
Thank you, Shane. Reminder before we start to share those microphones. If you are going to speak, make sure that microphone is. Good morning. Welcome, everybody. Before we get started, on behalf of the board, I'd like to extend our thanks to Chancellor Ward, and he will speak in a few minutes, and his team for the welcome to UW-Madison. We know that you've done this once or twice before. You're veterans on hosting our annual December meetings, but I know that doesn't necessarily make it any easier. There's always a lot of activity around UW-Madison. Certainly there's been some activity in the last 5 or 6 days, and we look forward to seeing and hearing more about what's going on here on this campus. We'll start right now, and so without further comment or ado, I'll turn it over to Chancellor Ward.
Well, thank you very much. I want to say welcome to everybody. This is the traditional campus meeting in Madison each December. I wish there was a more, how could I put it, gentle agenda. I think there are a variety of issues for the board that are quite demanding. I hope it's not my fault, but we'll see as we go through this. But one of the suggestions is that we try to put aside some of the current intense issues that come before the board that have a sort of very contemporary feel to them to look long term. And I think one of the requests that was made of chancellors, and I'm the person trying to go through this time, is to give a broad landscape of higher education and how it impacts on a particular campus, to sort of bring the broader issues of higher education nationally and internationally, and how might they have a bearing on a campus. So this is really flying at 10, 20,000 feet and trying to give a context for the issues that come up to you at the campus level. So I'm the first chancellor to volunteer to do this. We'll see how it goes, and I'd be interested in whether I'm pitching it at the right level. Too much detail, I'm too much in the stratosphere, I'm not quite sure. But let me try to go there. I titled the talk Strength Through Innovation and Flexibility. Obviously strength, quality, whatever word goes there, we're all pursuing an effort to try to be competitive, effective, serving our students and community well. And I think the two words that have dominated dialogue in higher education for the last 15 years have been innovation and flexibility. I know that the subtext is funding, and particularly the issue of public funding, but because that has been very uncertain and variable, and in fact, in a secular sense, gone downwards, much of what goes on in higher education is coping with that fiscal environment, and that has been primarily done through innovation and flexibility. I thought I'd start at not just 40,000 feet, but even higher, is that U.S. higher education has a special place in the world. Historically, since the end of World War II, it's seemed to be the gold standard of what should go on, and there's been no question that both the growth of access, the growth of quality, and the impact on society, whether through social mobility or through economic development, has always been part and parcel of how higher education has been looked at. That has changed over the last 20 years, and I think now it's a bit of a paradox, because we all know that those world-class properties are still with us, but at the same time there are allegations and perhaps documented cases of mediocrity or poor performance. And so I think one of the difficulties we're dealing with as we try to generalize about higher education is now variability, not some single theme. And in particular, when you deal with a nation state that's continental in its scale, ethnically diverse, large. When we are being compared with Finland or with Denmark, I want to assure you that this is where this problem comes up. Very small states with very homogeneous populations, very high tax levels, are going to look very different than the United States. I actually think it might be better to compare Norway and Minnesota and Finland and Wisconsin than comparing them to the United States. It's just a very odd kind of comparison. Much policy in Washington is now being dictated by averages of the United States compared to averages of very, very small nation states. There are people in Britain who call it the Nordic plot. They are trying to make themselves look good in the ranking tables because, of course, they are small, homogeneous populations, very high tax rates, and they will come out looking very well among many of the performance levels because they are actually socially as well as educationally determined. Second issue is in policy. There's still, in most public policy, an effort to try to come up with one standard or a green line or a red line above and below. And it comes back to the idea of one size fits all. The genius of U.S. higher education is mission diversity. There's no other nation in the world that has the least standardized and the most customized and therefore customer responsive educational system. The thing that is now being looked at as an attribute to admire in U.S. higher education is not research prowess that used to be it, but the enormous variability that makes mass higher education possible. If you, in fact, grow your access to 60, 70, or 80% of an age group, or 60% of a population, then the variability of that pool of people coming to college makes it necessary to have some mission variability. And in our case, it's everything from a great comprehensive research university to the most modest community college that you might find anywhere. And all of them can be excellent in different ways. That variability, and the system itself reflects that, seems to me the genius that we have. Having something that looks the same, that meets the needs of the diverse 18-year-olds and older who come to our colleges, wouldn't be a sensible way to address mass higher education. One size fits all is when you have a highly meritocratic, small enrollment structure in higher education. We're long beyond that. And finally, when we deal with change, there is huge debates going on, and this too is very clear in Washington, between those who are visionaries, seeing the role of e-learning, seeing the role of a different public-private partnership, seeing the role of a much more flexible, less state-directed higher education, which is really an effort to try to serve the society better with very limited resources. But there are others who are, in a sense, looking at past virtues. And they're usually the quality people who believe that you can compare, let's say, the United States in the late 19th century with less than 10% of the age group, 18 to 24, going to college, and seeing that in that very small group, a more merit-ridden kind of student body. Today, I think those past virtues are inappropriate. Most of the past virtues are, in fact, out of context when you look at mass higher education today. So I think there are a series of issues that make the debate and the discussion of U.S. higher education, it needs to be placed in a context. We have a range of quality, we have got great mission diversity, and we are by nature, as Americans, committed to a future, not a past virtues. We really are more optimistic about what we can do going forward rather than regretting that we are no longer what we were in the past. I think that frames, if we can see that, that frames so much of the good journalistic discussion of higher education. And I think unless we're aware of that, we tend to have an abbreviated dialogue. Another way of looking at what I just said is that there are many assumptions about higher education that really go back to the end of World War II. That much of what we have that's part and parcel of who we are was created, and the idea was to grow access, maintain high quality, and be largely publicly supported. That was a vision that was certainly around in the 1945 to 60 period. And I think that what has happened is that the limits of that vision, a very brilliant vision, a vision that has the National Science Foundation, the GI Bill of Rights, there were just many political actions of the decade following World War II that were based on assumptions that have not been fulfilled, particularly in the last 20 years. Let me talk about three of them. The first one is fiscal limits, that clearly most public universities, until really the very late 60s, were overwhelmingly supported by a state subsidy. They were unambiguously public utilities. Tuition was very low, often contributing perhaps 10% at the most to the total cost of education. So there was a commitment to high quality, high public subsidy, and low tuition. I think what happened is that shifted in the last 30 years or 20 years of the last century, to become more of a public-private commitment, particularly in how tuition slowly expanded to largely substitute for declining or slowing of the state subsidy. And in some respects, tuition policy today is simply the reciprocal of the fiscal policy that we adopt with respect to the state subsidy. And so, in many respects, the sum of the state subsidy and tuition may not grow. So we may increase tuition and get no new revenue. Who would like to be in that kind of business? You actually grow your price but get no new revenue. Because we've been recomputing the relationship between the state subsidy and tuition. That's a public policy decision that has been made year after year, both sides of the aisle. Let me give you an example of another country where that same decision on the ratio of public and private support was made by one act at one time, for the same reasons that we've been doing it gradually. But when you do it by one act at one time, the public understands it better than through water torture over 30 years. There was a gentleman called Tony Blair, who was the Prime Minister of Britain. He was allegedly left of centre. There are many Brits who are not sure about that. But as a left of centre politician, he realized that the growth of access in British undergraduate population in the period from about 1880 to about 2005 had been enormous, growing from about a quarter to a half, and then moving even higher towards levels that are achieved in the United States. But it was free. Higher education was free. Not obviously for living expenses, but tuition. He concluded that we can't afford this, that there's got to be a new public-private compact, certainly for those who can afford to pay modest tuition. And so there was a bill in the Parliament, I think it was 2005, 2006, said we have to introduce tuition. The taxpayer cannot completely afford the full cost of higher education. And secondly, with need-based aid, you can create graduated tuition. But more important is there are private benefits to higher education as well as public benefits. Therefore, it should be viewed as a public-private good. But he didn't say what the ratio was. 50-50, 90-10, 60-40. And so there was a long debate. His own party wasn't happy with this. They would just as soon have no tuition. The conservative side of the aisle was not sure it wanted need-based aid to be funded by tuition. So there were lots of debates. But in the end, there was an act of Parliament that made it 50-50. Quite abruptly, British students started to pay one-half the cost of undergraduate education, which was, interestingly enough, exactly the level of in-state tuition at Wisconsin. So in 2005, they introduced tuition about $9,000. They decided that was about half the cost of higher education in a developed country. And of course, that's where we are. We're about 50-50 now, state support tuition in the educational mission of the institution. British taxpayer knows that. They know that the change in the structure of tuition and state subsidy was an overt legislative decision saying this is half and half, and while we will provide loans and need-based aid, this is 50-50, not 100% on the back of the taxpayer. We never had that debate. We just did it by water torture. Just let the tuition grow up, the state subsidy level off, and sometime decline. We're now at 50-50. It would be good, I think, if we decided, is 50-50 right, from either a social justice or a fiscal responsibility point of view. But I think because it happened by water torture, and so gradually, many parents of our students don't understand this tuition increase is a completely different social compact than when I came to Wisconsin in 1960, and I only paid 10% of the cost of my tuition. My granddaughter is coming to one of the institutions in this system next year. She will be paying 50% of that cost. My son understands that, but many don't. Many think when they went to school 50 years ago or 30 years ago, they think that's the compact that still exists. And that has fundamentally changed in every state in the Union. And because there was never any policy debate, it's simply been a fiscal readjustment, we don't understand it. The second issue is equally important, and that is a commitment to the idea of common standards, the idea that maybe through mass higher education there is a loss of standards. The problem of common standards is it's a flawed psychological notion that at every age there is a narrow range of cognitive ability, when we all know that our developmental capacities have enormous variability by individuals. I might have been precocious in mathematics at 14, but lousy at English literature at 14. But at 21, I might have forgotten my mathematics, but now understood English poetry. In other words, our cognitive development in different areas of competency, we know, is different at different ages for different people. And so you may have people performing high levels and low levels at the same age. And yes, most standards are age-specific. I think what has happened is that it won't work. There's too much variability in competency at any given age. And so what we have begun to develop is what I call variable pathways. People going at different rates, taking different kinds of curriculum, going to a community college, going to Harvard. In other words, there are variable pathways to a perfectly good education in a mission-diverse system. And common standards do not accommodate the variability that our system is developing. So I want to say that quality limits, we can't have quality limits that hold every individual at 18 to the same standard. It first of all, doesn't make sense in terms of what we know about neurology and psychology, but it also, I think, means that you don't plan a curriculum for individuals whose competency at 18 may vary. They may be very good at violin and lousy on the drums. I mean, I can put it as simply as that. It doesn't have to be cognitive ability in subjects. So I think what we're doing, and through advising, and through having students, in a sense, either through placement or GPA or their own personal preference, they're taking variable pathways to getting an undergraduate degree. We should try to create more order in those pathways through better advising, more certain transfer. But nevertheless, I think it would be better to move away from what I call age-specific standards to the end result, which is different students pursuing different pathways and taking different lengths of time will eventually reach the level of competence that we want out of individuals when they're 21 to 24. And I think this is an important issue because the quick fix is hold everybody accountable to some minimum standard at any given age. It will not solve the problem. It may make people feel better, but it won't create any more competent people. And then finally, we have national limits. When the U.S. began to grow its higher education system in the 40s and 50s, there was virtually no global competition. Why did I end up getting on a boat and a train and ending up here in 1960? There's no question where you wanted to go to get a higher education in 1960. In fact, I was told very specifically by the consul in London when I got my Fulbright, well, you look like a guy who should go to a public, not a private. And when it comes to publics, I think the place that will put up with you is Wisconsin. So you got me because of the advice of a consul general in London. But now, of course, we're in a global competition. It's clear that China and India, obviously the development of the Bologna process in Europe is, I think, changing the competency, particularly the research competency of Europeans. And so I think that how we value ourselves is no longer in a monopoly situation. We are in a serious competitive world. And secondly, we've become more indispensable to the knowledge economy. In the past, it was possible for people to get degrees in the liberal arts and move directly into employment, or move into a law school or a medical school. Today, there are demands that for practical skills be combined with the liberal arts, because the knowledge economy wants a more applied sense of who you are. The liberal arts are still critical to our cognitive and our communicative skills, but there's this sense that we need to do a little bit more in order to be effective in the knowledge economy. We cannot, in a sense, be a narrow classical undergraduate education by itself. People should be able to get that, but by itself, there's still some challenges that we need to think about. How do we now articulate with a different knowledge economy in which certain skills, particularly, I think, with respect to the STEM areas, are really pretty critical, more critical than they were 40 years ago. So that's really where the old assumptions have collapsed. So as we move forward, the policy environment has to change, and the institutional coping has to change, irrespective of anything else that may be going on. So I think we've reached the level of old assumptions, but much that goes on in dialogue today is really based on those older assumptions. So what's going on in terms of public higher education funding? Narrowing it a bit closer now to a great public university and many and other institutions with perhaps a more segmented range, but still nevertheless outstanding public institutions. The first thing we can say is there is a revenue crisis. Now, crisis is a strong word, and so maybe I should be more moderate. There is a funding gap. That is, what we would aspire to do, we probably are not funded adequately to get there. But the question is, where should the funding gap be made up? That's the question. It doesn't have to just automatically, through a knee-jerk, be the state. In other words, there is a funding gap. If you want to be as good as you are, there are a variety of other ways you'd approach it. Efficiencies, capacity, there are cost containment. There are all sorts of ways you can deal with the funding gap. Unfortunately, frequently the debate is just about whether state or tuition are the only places where we can find it. There are many, many other places where you can find a means to deal with a funding gap. But let me point out why do we have the rhetoric of a revenue crisis or a funding gap. First is that we used to believe in a pendulum. When I was a scholar, made an honest living as a scholar in the 80s, that metaphor of the pendulum was often used in this state, where depending on the budget bill, there would either be high state support or moderate state support, or even low state support. But when we were in a condition of low state support, there was an assumption it was a pendulum. And if we just were patient enough, 2 or 3 years later, the pendulum would swing back and we'd get high state support again. And really between 1945 and about 1990, the pendulum metaphor of adequate and inadequate funding, particularly from the state, or the combination of tuition and the state, was not a bad idea. It was a pendulum that swung, probably swung more in the direction of adequate funding to inadequate, but it was swinging. And the problem is that I think over the last 10 years, that pendulum is not only swinging freely without direction, but it's actually fallen off its hook. It's lying on the floor and maybe embedded in concrete. So waiting around for this pendulum to swing back to something more attractive to us is not prudent, in my judgment. We'd better take other actions that are contingent on the idea that we hope state subsidies will continue to improve, but by itself, that hope is not a way of managing the challenges of the next 5 years. The second issue is that most of the debate about the funding gap is a debate about the relationship between state subsidy and tuition. The problem is there are no major revenue gains to be had from that. Different states have different ratios. You may or may not know the state of Pennsylvania now Pennsylvania State University receives about 3 to 4% of its support from the state. And of course that's very high tuition. So as you move through the country, you will see different combinations of tuition and subsidy. We're right in the middle, about 50-50. Some states, like I think Nebraska, for example, small population, is slightly higher contribution from tuition than from the state. But we vary a great deal. But almost every state in the union has substituted tuition for state support without saying it's a new social compact. The sooner we say we have a different social compact and be honest about it, I think our consumers who are looking at taxes, students and parents looking at tuition, would understand it better. If there's no new revenue from increased tuition, really that is a serious problem for our own public relations with the public and with our students. And that has been true for about 5 or 6 years. Why it's confusing is that great research universities only get between 25 and 30% of their funding from these two sources. And so UW-Madison, when I go downtown, say, well, why does the total budget go up? Why don't you? Well, it's because philanthropy and research funding and auxiliary revenues go up, not because we get any new money from the sum of tuition and public subsidy. So it's sometimes hard to explain because the total budget continues to go up. Now, again, there are parts of that which may start to level off. Philanthropy in a low interest rate environment, research in an environment in which the federal government may well go over the cliff and there will be a 9 or 10% cut in research expenditures federally. That could change and create a compound problem for universities like this. But the big point is that we do have gains in revenue, but they're not coming from the primary subsistence of the educational mission. I pointed out also that federal and philanthropic funds are actually leveraged more than a guaranteed base support. They come because you work on the excellence that's sustained by the base budget and argue we're doing a good thing with tuition and the state subsidy. You need to compound that. For example, had we not had a building boom on this campus with the help of private funding and to some degree state funding, the research capacity of the campus and its ability to get the money would not be there. Federal government rarely supports building. And so the infrastructure in biochemistry, the infrastructure we have in many areas of engineering, computer science, that becomes an asset that then changes the operating budget for research. So there is a sort of leveraged effect for the federal money. And of course, philanthropic funds only go to excellence. Very few people say, oh, there's a lousy department, let me give them some money. It just doesn't happen. Oh, this is outstanding, I'd like to give them money. So philanthropy is driven by the margin of excellence. And so if you are in fact trying to solve difficult problems, philanthropy is not usually very easy source of money. Usually you have to find tuition or state money to resolve problems, because there may be departments that you just can't allow to be poor. You just have to have them as part of your set. And finally, I think public universities need a new strategy to combine their mixed revenues with a public vision. We are constantly, and perhaps at times legitimately, accused of going, quote, commercial. I think that's too strong a word, just like a crisis of revenue is too strong. But nevertheless, we have 150 years in Wisconsin of deep public support by yours, perhaps even my great-grandparents and grandparents. The university is here because of the sacrifices of 3 or 4 generations, and we can't walk away from that. That is a commitment we have to keep to our past. But this generation, for a variety of reasons, will never be able to be as generous as 3 or 4 or 5 generations ago. Costs are different, the mass higher education is different, and so on. So we have to continue to advance the public vision, which devalues a great deal of cynicism that comes because of the changes in how universities are coping with this revenue crisis. And so I just want to stress that we do have to work on what we call the Wisconsin idea, and that even our philanthropists and the federal government funding still, therefore, now has to contribute to that public purpose. Just because it's separate doesn't mean it neglects that public vision. This is the strategic framework that was developed 5 years ago on this campus. I have not changed it. It's a little hard to see. But when I was here last time, we focused on the 3 balls at the top, our mission. The key things that we were doing educationally, research scholarship, educational experience, and the Wisconsin idea, our outreach. That's where we were. What I think I've had to focus on in my 2 years is the middle of the bottom 3 balls. Hard to read, but let me say, it's stewards of our resources. How do we stewards of our resources? Because they're finite and infinitely more valuable to us now than they were 20 years ago. There's no automatic exponent that they will grow. So I think leadership in higher education today is about sustaining the limited and variable resources that we have, rather than, in a sense, waiting around for resources to come that will allow you to do something a year or 2 later if you're just patient. Waiting around won't happen. We have to be active stewards of what we have while still making the case for new resources. So I think there's a much greater emphasis on what I would call resource management, prudent resource management, than just simply having goals and just hoping that there's a banker around to help you. Let me now talk a little bit about how this has bearing on UW. You saw this a year ago. This is when I came back. We drew this diagram to try to explain the funding gap. So this red line here. Here is the expenditures. As you see, the various areas of expenditure in terms of research, education, and so on. And on this side, you see our revenues. And these revenues left us, particularly because of state funding and of tuition, and even auxiliary revenues, left us with a funding gap in the base budget, not the leverage budget, which is research and technology transfer, and philanthropy, which is the margin of excellence. These up here are not necessarily easily substitutable for these down here. And you do need about, in my view, about 25% of your budget in the base budget to generate the leveraged effect. If you drop down too low here, then you don't have enough excellence in the base to leverage the excellence that comes from the outside. So this funding gap in the base is an interesting conceptual challenge. What do we do about it? Wait until state funding and tuition fills it back in, or do we have some other options? Here you'll see, again, I wish it was clearer, but here you'll see some of the ways we try to look at this. Where are our existing revenues? You'll notice that on this diagram, see, here's the gap, and here's state funding and tuition. We will still try to push state funding and tuition into that gap. By itself, it won't solve the problem. And there are two other areas that we focused on. Educational innovation, which can improve performance, but also capacity and efficiency, and administrative excellence, which can also be sort of a cost containment reallocation process. So all four of these have to contribute to the gap. And in fact, in the short run, it may be innovation and administrative excellence that will do more to help us out in the short run than will be these other two categories that will be hard, tough negotiations with state legislators, not just in Wisconsin. And then I think philanthropy and research, there's going to have to be a way in which we find ways to feed money off these two categories into the gap. So it's a much more complicated budget. You now take all your existing revenues and try to see in what way can you fill that gap in ways that are quite untraditional and in fact would require a great deal more flexibility to do. And that's why innovation and flexibility. We need to innovate, but to innovate effectively we need flexibility. Let me go over to this and say what are some concrete examples of how we're doing this. Let me take the top line up there. Endowed chairs, need-based aid. In other words, philanthropy needs now, having been really emphasized professional schools and has emphasized buildings. I think we now have to look at ways in which they can endow more faculty positions, which save state money, but they are the best positions. And we need to think about need-based aid as being a very high priority of philanthropy because obviously tuition is drifting upwards. It's pretty critical to maintain access. I think there are many alums out there who so appreciate their own low-cost higher education at a time when tuition was low, they'll be prepared to help us there. The second one is the issue of research. There are two areas where research will have to adapt to. In addition to what I call serendipitous research, research that is simply driven by curiosity, from which most major innovations come from, we will have to do, in addition to that, two things. Much better job of large-scale research ventures that are inter- or transdisciplinary, usually multi-million-dollar proposals. Very few institutions have a capacity to do that. We do. And over the last 4 or 5 years, the size of large federally funded research contracts that can only be done in 5 or 6 institutions, we have to be more competitive in getting those, and we are. And the second one is obviously knowledge transfer, whether through the research board, whether through patents and licensing or startup companies, and creating a foundation into which the surplus of those activities create a fund for funding research itself, the self-cycling research fund. Then if we look at educational innovation, there are revenue sources. Professional master's degrees, primarily for adult students, but even for students of the liberal arts who wish to get now a pre-professional or semi-professional degree or certificate before going into the labor market. They, of course, there are no tuition regulations there. They would have to be developed in a sense to meet the needs of the marketplace, the needs of the state, but one can in fact set tuition realistically to recover costs. The other one is what we call capstone certificates, which again can be handled online in the intersession during the summer school, or even parallel with the existing session, which allow again liberal arts undergraduates to get a pre-professional exposure while still undergraduates. It's also perhaps a different way to teach languages intensively rather than over 4 years, have in effect very tightly organized intensive experiences that would be apart from the regular curriculum. So these, I put them in there not because it's the only thing you do with e-learning, but I think blended and online learning is a source of significant outreach, but also an alternative revenue. And then in this one here, administrative excellence, I think here the important thing is the ability that was given to us in the last budget to reallocate to priorities. There is now an incentive to save money on different categories of expenditure. If you couldn't reallocate it, just reverted to the state. There was no incentive system to save money on IT or save money in some arcane administrative function. Now, because we can reallocate, including to salary, means that there is a great incentive to find cost containment within parts of the institution where we've probably been negligent in seeing we could do better in those areas. Obviously, in state funding, I think the way the state funds us, where a lot of the expense that the taxpayer sees is cost to continue or the pay plan. Obviously, making that more transparent and clearer so that the base budget of the university is not going up. It's just energy costs, IT costs that are going up. And we need to have a better understanding as we communicate with the public what cost to continue is in our budgets. It doesn't mean to say we're entitled to the entire cost to continue if the tax base is not there, but nevertheless, I think we need to make clear what the increase in our budget is being caused by. It's not any cost that we are imposing on our students, but the inevitable problem of the cost to continue. And finally, in tuition, I think we've got to deal with how we handle enrollment management, how many students do we take from particular sources while having primary commitment to the state. And program-specific tuition is there are areas of the campus where we have unmet demand. Engineering and business would be examples of this, where it would be simply smart for us to think about differential program-specific tuition, simply because accountants actually get jobs. And if you look at our tuition for accountants, it's actually very, very modest compared to any other Big Ten institution. And of course, I think this again has enrollment management has a bearing on out-of-state, in-state, because obviously in-state tuition is highly subsidized, and out-of-state tuition has revenues that can flow to help in-state tuition be lower. So how we manage that as a revenue outcome is not just a social matter of preferring to meet the needs of the state, but the state has created for the university a revenue issue about how you manage those two issues. I hope that we continue to give preeminence to the social purpose. But remember, we've been stuck with an issue of a cross-subsidy between out-of-state and in-state students that we have to manage, but the legislature does not. It just makes the rule. So let me talk about filling those gaps very quickly. When you look at philanthropy, we're going to be increased investment in the base budget. The best example of that is the business school, where the entire deanship shop has been now named after a major gift. This takes away the state support of the administrative and leadership infrastructure of the School of Business. These are real transferable savings from the state subsidy. And there's great interest in this, deanships at professional schools. So increased investment in the base budget, that would be an example. Normally, these areas of the campus are in the base budget. Need-based aid to ensure access, I've mentioned already. Fully endowed named professorships on this campus. There are well over 200 named professorships, which are really not chairs but stools. They're not fully funded. An endowed chair should carry at least 1/2 the salary of that position. Many of them carry much less than that. And when we compare ourselves with Michigan, we are way, way behind in the amount of endowment money behind each professorship. So when I say fully endowed, I mean it's a real chair, it's full legs. It's not just partial support of that chair. And finally, we are in a mode of really massive education innovation. There are areas of the campus that are fundamentally changing, particularly areas of engineering. And they're spreading across the campus at different rates. There are no funds to capitalize that. There are a huge number of one-time funds to allow classrooms to be turned over into more innovative and performance-enhanced areas. And I think finding funds from alums to do that is an area where they see an improvement in the way we're organized and an improvement in how we're using our funding. So I think those are areas where, working with the foundation, we're beginning to recalibrate what we're about. Enhanced research and economic development, I think this you'll hear more about this afternoon from my colleague Paul DeLuca, the predictable seeding of external funding. Why are we successful at external funding? The headlines you recently read, UW-Madison drops 1 place in research funding, 3 to 4. It's rounding error. The headlines are UW-Madison drops 1 place. It's not. UW-Madison is in the top 5 for the last 30 years in federal research funding. Odd way as a good headline. But predictable seeding of external funding, that is allocating to individuals, particularly young scholars, appropriate seed money, is very, very important. And while WARF, one of our endowments helps us do that. Already we're struggling a little bit to make sure we're seeding all our young faculty. Second thing is if that seeding can be helped by partnerships. There are external sources to find that seeding and expanding our partnerships to expand capacity and success. Obviously, entrepreneurs who have been successful because they were once here. Obviously, there are investors and other research universities around the world with whom we're collaborating. And finally, of course, we do need to generate more products and companies from our research and ideas. This is one of the areas where we're alleged to be becoming commercial. What I hope is this is in addition to basic research, not a substitute for basic research. And what you will hear about this afternoon from Paul is a real effort by Wharton Research Park University to create a one-stop shopping at every step in discovery to product. We're calling it E2P. And every one of those colors, as you move from idea to market, we are going to have some one-stop shopping. Right now, our problem is not we don't have help, there's too much help, it's too fragmented. Educational innovation. These are some of the areas that I've been outlining over and above those I did already. Curriculum design, departments across the campus transforming their curriculum, market need, best use of capacity. In many cases, curriculum redesign is also about interdepartmental connections of curriculum as well. I think the cost of educational innovation gives some options. It then seeds curriculum innovation. So the great thing about technical innovation is it opens the possibilities of really rethinking the curriculum itself. Alternative delivery, that's pretty straightforward. Flipped classrooms is the most obvious way, where you don't listen to lectures at the front like you're doing with me right now. In fact, the instructor becomes a coach and wanders around more like an assistant as students do their exercises and their work having received the lecture online. You see a few others up there, flexible degrees and MOOCs. We've already heard at the system level. We are exploring how and in what way you can deal with the MOOC situation, the massive online learning proposals. And I think particularly the issue of self-paced learning, which gets around the issue of the cognitive aging of people being variable. Self-paced learning is the perfect way to deal with variable skills at a given age. Serving graduating more students, I think that's the key that we're facing in engineering and many professional schools, and that's particularly a need to increase capacity in high-demand areas, but we're going to have to expect those high-demand areas to help us get there. And finally, of course, an agile infrastructure, restructuring units. Most research universities have the heritage of the 20th century in having many, many small departments. The 21st century will require us to have federations of departments. The minimum cost in IT requires departments, I think, of 50 or 60, not 9 or 10. You can't take advantage of innovation by being small. It doesn't mean you lose your curricular identity. It just means you learn to federate in an effective way. In any event, 20th century knowledge is growing through interdisciplinarity, not through subdisciplinarity. One area that I think we have underestimated and underperformed is summer offerings, to accelerate time to degree, but also to make them, in a sense, not accidental results of faculty preference, but a strategic purpose to serve the needs of students in the state. And finally, I think streamlining our own processes. When we talk about flexibility, the first thing I hear is the system. It's inflexible. It's a bureaucracy. Second thing is the state is inflexible. They're very mean-spirited in how they deal with us. And then I say, okay, I'll believe that, but what about ourselves? How slow can we be? We can sometimes be slower than the state and the system. So that's a dialogue going on at UW-Madison, is what do we do to ourselves that slow everything down? Some of our policies were set in the early part of the 20th century. They're not appropriate to the kind of change we need during the course of this century. Administrative streamlining, we're calling this our Administrative Excellence Project. I think probably universities are the most backward in using IT, but the most forward in innovating in how to use IT. We don't know how to scale innovation. We know how to introduce an innovation, but we don't know how to scale it. So consolidation and aggregation of our IT structure. And of course, most of the ideas come from our institutions. But then when they go outside our institutions, they're used at scale. They're not used at the individual level. Space management with an educational innovation ought to make the large classroom pretty obsolete in the next 5 years. May make the credit hour obsolete, which would be even better, but I won't go there. We've got demand and management of supplies, how we purchase, and here's a case where I think collaboration with the system, with each other, is important. Enhanced coordination of facilities. This is, for example, a conference plan. We have an incredible disaggregated facility structure where each entity, in a sense, is doing the same thing. It's really the problem of how we give advice on entrepreneurship. It's not that we don't do it. It's all disaggregated. And finally, streamlining grants management process. We rely 45% of our revenue on grants. The grants management needs to be better and more effective. And finally, here's a slide for boards of regents. What is it? Where are things that you might think about? Everything I've talked about is really about revenue from non-state, non-tuition sources and about self-help and innovation within the campus. So everything I've put on, nothing is really coming your way, perhaps some flexibilities. So I think here I do believe that because the system is now made up of outstanding but mission-diverse institutions, autonomy may not be quite the right word, but we do need increased on-site autonomy for those people. If it's the dean of business wants to make a decision, I don't want to micromanage him. And if I have to make some decisions which make sense, usually they're small decisions, not big strategic decisions, but usually have to be made at that time. I think some sense of confidence in how decisions are made, and we have very elaborate structures often for making these decisions, overview, and of course because you have governance both inside and outside, are often of great challenge. This doesn't mean to say governance is not important, but I think in the 21st century, figuring out how governance interfaces with what I call leadership is an interesting question we should talk about. I don't know there's a quick answer. Agile personnel systems, that's obviously going to come up today. People will not like the word agile. It might be thought of as thoughtless or insensitive. There are all sorts of other adjectives could go in there for people who are probably in this room. But we were given an opportunity to replan our personnel system at the system level and the campus level, and I do think that it describes agility, because many of our payroll is not a state payroll. 70% of our payroll is not from the state or tuition, and many of those grants are short-term. And if you have short-term money, you can't have long-term contracts. So it doesn't, the existing system does not really, is not really structured for 70% of our revenue, which is rarely more than 3 years in duration. Now, we're so good that we get new revenues to replace the 3-year revenues. And there is a cycle time which allows you to get more and more money through these grants. But there could be, for example, with this federal cliff, there could be a drop, which would be catastrophic for UW-Madison in research receipts. And then there would be no replacement. Some grants would end, and how are you supposed to cope with that? Program-specific tuition, I think, is pretty critical. Having the same tuition across the board just doesn't strike me in this world of such varied experiences as the humanities and the business school. The idea that you might have nuances, not radical differences, but nuanced differences, seems to me to be just an obvious way to think about revenue and what happens to students when they leave the place. And finally, I raised earlier, how do we deal with enrollment with respect to in- and out-of-state tuition? Maybe the way, rather than saying a great deal about this right now, I could move on to this table, and I think there's something on that table that looks very interesting. These are our competitors just in the Big Ten, not worldwide. It's odd that I think it's a rather stark observation. My colleagues look at that and they say, oh, that's kind of great. We like the idea that your state wants to do that. Our competitors love it. Now, there is obviously a social purpose in that, and I don't want to underestimate that social purpose. Our primary goal is to offer an outstanding university to the graduates of Wisconsin high schools. However, when you admit a freshman class, it's terribly difficult to know how to hit 25%. We've been just below 25% for about 30 years. But because of the demography of Wisconsin is now declining, the number of high schools graduating from Wisconsin high schools is declining, plus the fact that we're getting through more students in 4 years, we've got some capacity. And if we use the same percentages, we might end up with out-of-state tuition going into the 26.5%. This is because of the fact that it's an art, not a science, of recruiting students. But in any event, it seems to me 25% is an arbitrary figure set in 1969. I don't know what a good figure might be. Maybe trusting the university to give you a 5-year proposal for what the out-of-state admissions would be under changing demographic circumstances might be one way, or raising it by a given number of students that would be in-state and out-of-state. We can take more undergraduate students from the state, even though we will increase the out-of-state percentage slightly because of our good works in getting more kids to graduate in 4 years. We have increased capacity. This problem has come up because we have more kids graduating in 4 years. So obviously you see the variation in out-of-state tuition or out-of-state residence. Many states have just abandoned the populist or social purpose, particularly states with high levels of rural depopulation. Notice Iowa, Purdue, Iowa and Indiana are struggling with their populations and rural depopulation to sustain an in-state level at, say, 75%. So they have just said, we'll go into the marketplace and make money on educating people from other states. Minnesota, which used to be around 4% about 5 years ago, concluded this is a way to import out-of-state talent to the Twin Cities. They have let theirs go very steeply upwards to 18% very recently, and the business community in Minnesota said, bring as many talented out-of-state people to the Twin Cities. We're short of skilled labor. So that's the opposite of the idea here, where somehow or other having out-of-state students takes away from in-state talent that would stay here. So each state is going through a debate about this, but without restrictions. They're debating it in terms of best policy, without having to sort of hang on to something that is, well over, let's see, 1969. It's a long time ago when this was set. And by the way, it was probably set because of the rebellious nature of out-of-state students in 1968 and 69. So the motive is quite different than anything we have right now. So later today we will discuss this. My view is there's no one quick solution to this. But what we do need, I think, is a little flexibility around that 25%. And I rely on feedback from this group, legislators and others, as how we might get there. Right now the proposal is 30%. But we don't have to lock one outcome in stone. There are a variety of ways we can work on. But having the 25 is almost as silly as having another level, let's say like 30. 30 at least gives us flexibility. 25 makes our admissions task very, very difficult. Finally, what about the policy environment that you folks cope with? I think the key, I'm going to be repetitive here and just say what's the new environment. This was a slide I actually developed just as I left ACE. It's not changed in the 2.5 years I've been retired. One is, we've really got to press the idea of institutional variability. Too many policymakers want to treat everybody the same. The richness of our education system is variability, customization, not standardization. The standardization language of educational reform will not solve the problem of mediocrity. It will destroy precocity without resolving mediocrity. Variability and customization is the way to go. Simplify government engagement. Clearly, the rules that often engage an intervention are very complicated. The area that's best is need-based aid. How a student gets need-based aid today is a scandal, and I think most of it is not of our making, but the way in which we give out aid. Set realistic performance outcomes. Many performance outcomes are really contradictory. A good example that was recently indicated is if you take time to degree, using 4 or 4.5 year time to degree, one of the big factors in that achievement is class access, which can be now handled through educational innovation, not just classroom size. And I think the issue of advising, particularly of freshmen and sophomores, who if they fail in their 6-week examination, intensive advising about that failure will guarantee they get a C and not an F. Advising is not cheap. When you deal with advising, it gets called administration in all the official tables. The higher administration cost, which may be caused by improving advising, is a negative performance indicator, while time to degree is a positive performance. We've got to get the performance indicators aligned so that your interventions to get one outcome doesn't screw you on another outcome. So that's just one example. I mean, the issue of time to degree or completion rates, only recently has this nation had a set of data that allows you to count transfer students who graduate elsewhere in your graduation rate. So we, on the world tables, we were just counting individuals who graduated at the same institution. UW-Madison loses, as many of our colleagues here lose students who graduate elsewhere. They don't count as graduates of this country. It's actually a 20% difference between the right data and the wrong data, but our critics continue to use the old data, which does not count transfer students. The majority of students now have credits at more than one institution. 25% of all our students have credits at 4 institutions. Transfer is a big deal in the United States. Most other countries do not have this level of transfer. Most people are at one institution for the 3 years. And of course, the selectivity in many European institutions means the dropout rate will be less because they're taking fewer risks. And finally, revolve this one, this final one. What is the right percentage of an individual's investment in their own education, or the family, and the public? At some point, we have to decide what that is. Just moaning about tuition or decline in state subsidy when we don't know what we want the proportion to be is going to get us nowhere. We need to have a debate that says, let's agree downtown, in the universities, 75, 25, 50, 50, 60, so that the consumer knows that they are in fact obligated. The time that child is born, 20 or 18 years later, they're likely to pay 40% of the cost of the education of that kid. Not that it's free or it's low tuition. Or we've got a social compact that says we're going to go back to low tuition. I don't think it's going to happen, but we could say that. So we need a policy that is very honest with the public about public higher education being an individual as well as a public responsibility. I myself don't know what that proportion should be, and I bet if we went around the table, you would come up with different numbers. Some people would say it's an outrage, there should be any individual contribution. This is a public service. I don't know how we get there politically, if that's the outcome you want. But some proportion. But simply having a fight over tuition and state support without deciding what is an appropriate social compact means that there'll be a futile debate for another 10 years on what tuition means, what the state subsidy means. And on that very high note, I will end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave. Any questions? We all have. I'm all thinking I know a lot about what David just presented in excellent fashion. Any questions or comments that people would like? That we have a few minutes to. Regent Drew.
As always, very insightful comments. I was particularly interested in what you said about the public policy in Britain that all at once went to 50%. And if we continue, when we're at about 50%, we're going to keep going in the other direction unless there is some kind of public policy decision. I'm going to ask a question about something you didn't talk about, and that's the question of diversity on the UW-Madison campus. There was a recent study out of the University of Pennsylvania that sort of pointed out in sort of stark relief, about 1% of the student body at Madison is black males, and about close to 50% of the football and basketball team is black males, and there are huge gaps in graduation rates amongst black male athletes, black male students, and the general population. So what are your thoughts in terms of what can be done to sort of change that situation? It's been a pretty intractable problem for many, many years here.
Yeah, I would say I accept the critique, first of all. What you're describing is a serious problem. I think I also accept your last statement that it's intractable. That is, I think there's been a lot of efforts to try and confront it. Denying it doesn't help. I think you're absolutely right, but it's there. One of the ways we've tried to deal with this is, first of all, make sure that as we recruit students who feel both comfortable and academically successful here. And one of our great successes in this area is not increasing the number but the performance in relation to majority students is now way, way closer than it was 20 years ago. So the diverse students who join us are doing much better. There is a very special issue, though, I think, about black African Americans and the contrast with athletics and academics. I would argue that's a national problem, not just, it's a little exacerbated here because the local population is not as diverse, let's say, as Pennsylvania or Southern California, where, in a sense, you can use local redress to sort of resolve the imbalance. In the upper Midwest, this requires, of course, an out-of-state strategy as well as a very strong strategy in Milwaukee. The big thing the change we may have done would be the following. Obviously, improving need-based aid, but you've got to be careful that it can't be racially defined. But I think there is taking the low-income problem and dealing with that as need-based aid so that everybody benefits from that. The second thing is you recruit in groups, not individually. There's a tendency to, if you recruit 5 students from underrepresented group, all eligible to be admitted, as a group of 5, they'll invariably do better if you choose one of them and let the others go somewhere else. So there are some strategies. The Posse group that are recruiting on our behalf in Chicago, New York, Minneapolis, and other places have been trying to create this group consciousness. And then finally, you have to recognize a sense of identity within the larger population. They're such profound minorities, unlike many Eastern schools or Southern California. There has to be some way in which there is space for them to be who they are. That is often very difficult on a campus in which the character of the minority is so extreme. The athletic issue, I think, I honestly don't quite know. If I had an answer, I'd give it to you. I think that to some degree you could argue at least it gives an educational opportunity to individuals who might not otherwise go to college. But the disproportions really bother me like they bother you. Sorry, I don't have a quick fix.
Regent Whitburn.
Thank you, Chancellor, for a really broad, thoughtful, forward-looking examination. I think we all value, can take special value from your perspective, having been here twice. Most of your presentation was around source of dollars, a little less on where the dollars are going. Dollars are dear these days, government everywhere, in the foundations and certainly in families. Our lead presentation at our last meeting, and I don't recall if you were here for it, I think you might have been the economist from Georgetown, had interesting takeaways. One was that in our space here in higher education, we share together with healthcare the space that's the least efficient. And how are you thinking about, down at the other end of State Street, we frequently hear, oh, they're very inefficient. Right.
Right. I think that's
on these various campuses. Right. Are you satisfied with our discipline within our university family to, in fact, drive the efficiencies that we need, understanding that dollars are dear and are going to be for some time?
It's a great question, and I might not have emphasized the concept that I call self-help since I returned. That is, on campus, some people are a little irritated because much of the filling of that gap comes from internal savings or investment in alternative delivery systems. So you may note that while one tries to play around with the state subsidy and tuition, I'm not confident, even though I might advocate for that, that will backfill the revenue gap. Most of it will come from performance and capacity improvements, administrative streamlining, which is cost containment, if you like, mergers that try to create larger units of operations. So I think unless we are conscious of the fact that we are a high-cost enterprise, we won't get to where we need to be, nor will we create a situation where we can persuade people to reinvest at the state level. I think prior to a massive effort to reinvest publicly in higher education, we have to show parallel, if not prior, ways that we can use the dollars we have more effectively. And I think that, I hope it perhaps didn't come through, but the concept of self-help has been a big message I've been giving the campus.
Regina.
Regent Miller.
Thank you, Chancellor. Once again, we really appreciate the way you have of explaining and synthesizing the problems that we face. And it was not only was it interesting, but it was educational, and I appreciate it. I have one question to ask you. When you talk about combining the departments and the disciplines, and that it will be an important cost savings, what problems do you see in managing those combinations?
Egos. I mean, the ratio of an ego to an identity, a professional identity, is very important, and you have to respect that. People who are certainly over 45 or 50 will have embedded their entire life in a structure, maybe a small structure, that in 1980 seemed like the right thing to do. So when they were young people, this was the right thing to do, was to specialize in this area. However, I think there are areas where interdisciplinarity, rather than cost savings, can allow you to drive this for academic reasons, which happen to have cost savings. So my view is you don't lead with cost savings, but rather argue that in the epistemology of 21st century knowledge, the merger of programs, the transdisciplinarity, is a good thing. So, and that's what's going on. You create a debate which argues that every 50 years or so, the intellectual division of labor, how you create disciplines out of knowledge, is changing. I mean, media studies that comes out of journalism and film and radio, TV. I mean, there are bigger entities now looking at what used to be smaller disciplines. And in some cases, what happens is that, like modern genetics, revolutionized biology about 20, 25 years ago. And so, in a way, everybody's a geneticist, so it doesn't matter intellectually. But I think bringing together, understanding how microbiology fits in a larger arena is something that's now beginning to develop. And out of it, I think, will come how we deliver services to small programs is a problem administratively. It's easier to deliver them to larger groupings. And if you can find an academic reason to do that, it makes a great deal of sense. Just as I think when we're trying to argue there are capacity increases in the use of blended learning, if you say first there are performance gains. The problem often with the performance gains is we use A students in the data. A students don't improve with blended learning. They're already A students. You have to look at the B, C, and D students if you're going to get any improvement. And that's been one of the problems. What are often arguably small gains from blended learning are actually because you really want the C and the D students to improve. The B plus and the A students probably are running at a level where it doesn't matter what the pedagogy is. So I think that there is the performance. And of course you can have open labs from 6 a.m. to midnight, people wandering around like coaches. It's a much more effective way of performing the educational mission, but it's also, in the end, gives you greater capacity. So I think the way I see this is trying to have a different academic vision of the institution, as well as trying to cope with the cost structure, trying to do both together. And if we don't, just driving the cost, the culture, for good reasons and bad reasons, will resist. And I don't think you can get there. So this has to be done in a very nuanced, respectful way if we're to do the changes we need.
Regent Walsh, are you grabbing for a microphone?
Yeah, I just have a question on the non-resident issue. I recall when we actually lowered the non-resident tuition because the marketplace was telling us that we were losing non-resident. And I remember back in the 60s, and 67 was Dow, and 70 was the Army Math Research Center, and I do remember why all the problems we had. But the simple fact is we're the only one with this rule, and we got to ask ourselves, where did it come from? And if you look at it hard, we really shouldn't have the rule. But that begs the issue because we still have the issue of Wisconsin residents. And the question I have is has something changed that whereby we can say we can provide 200 more students because we're going to make more with some more non-resident Do we have more space that we didn't have back 8, 9 years ago?
Yeah, it's because the 4-year graduation rate has gone up pretty
And
steeply.
how long do you think that'll last?
Well, it'll peak, of course, because once you get over 85% of your students going through in 4 years, you can't get there any further. So we're fairly close to that right now.
Okay.
I'm not sure there's much we... So this is an opportunity to reestablish a new parameter, which is slightly above 25%, where we use this capacity creatively, still giving more places to state students, but allowing that out-of-state tuition to drift up a bit.
Yeah, well, and it makes sense as long as we're responding to metrics. But then the other question I have is, what is the profile today of the non-resident student? And if we moved and we brought more in, would you anticipate that the profile would significantly change as compared to the profile of the last resident being accepted?
Good point. This has always been a difficult point because you're putting out offers on a probability basis, and the demography of outstate and in-state vary, and each year it's never quite right, the take you get of the number of offers. But you're making a good point, because when I was made an honest living teaching, the out-of-state student GPA and standardized scores were significantly higher than the in-state. Over the 80s and 90s, that evened out. And one of the interesting questions that we can't answer perfectly right now is if we were to devote all the new capacity just to in-state students, we would dig deep enough into the high school class that would be admitting students academically that we probably not admitted in the last 15 years. I'm not sure that's a good idea. So finding some balance between the in-state and out-of-state, which the 25% makes difficult to do. Even 27% would resolve all my problems. It doesn't need a huge change. And then the change won't be that great, because I don't think the 4-year degree thing is going to change dramatically going forward.
So we would actually be digging into an inventory that might otherwise go
to the other campuses.
So we wouldn't have accomplished a whole lot in terms of the total number.
Right. But if people want to come to Madison, they get angry if they can't. And on the other hand, they have access to perfectly good other institutions, and they can transfer to Madison or go to our graduate school. Freshman isn't the only access point to UW-Madison. But this is tricky, by the way, David. I would say of all the tortuous empirical aspects of policy deliberate, this one is difficult because the numbers are so difficult to deal with. How many you offer, the changing demography of the high school class, it's so hard. And the percentage is based on a fixed level, but there's a variable level of acceptances. So it makes the statistic rather silly in terms of real policy development.
And the yield is subject to dynamics of other schools, too.
Correct.
All right. Thank you again, Chancellor Ward.
Nothing other than to say to Chancellor Ward, it's very nice to have you back. Before I talk a little bit about the flexible degree and introduce our presenters for that today, I do have the pleasure of introducing an international guest. He is Dr. Lucio Camara Alves, who's here with us today from Brazil, I think in the corner over here. Welcome, Dr. Alves. Glad to have you. We got to know Chancellor Shields during Chancellor Shields' recent visit to Brazil. Dr. Alves is currently the director of the International Office and Associate Professor at the Federal Rural University of Pernambuco, a higher education institution in Brazil that specializes in academic coursework and research in agricultural sciences and the development of rural areas. The university and Dr. Alves are both actively engaged in the Science Without Borders program initiative. Dr. Alves has experience in the area of veterinary medicine with a PhD in veterinary science with an emphasis on parasitic diseases of animals. He completed postdoctoral work at the University of Georgia. So we are very happy to have you here with us today, Dr. Alves, and we look forward to learning from you and your Brazilian colleagues. Thank you.
All right. Our next agenda item is the UW Flexible Option Initiative. As I'm sure most of you know, there was a major announcement at UW-Milwaukee last week when we unveiled the
the first round of Flex Degree programs to be launched next fall. This is a concept which you know has created a good deal of potential. We heard Chancellor Ward talk a little bit about it, and has generated a lot of excitement on our state and our campuses. Here to tell us more is President Riley.
Thank you, President Smith, and good morning to everybody. Good to see you all. As Regent Smith just noted, the new UW Flexible option is generating a lot of buzz, both on campus and off. Molly Corbett-Broad, who's president of the American Council on Education, who will be addressing this board in February, has called it, quote, visionary and evolutionary. Cited in a Milwaukee Journal Sentinel story, she went on to say, it's going to be interesting to watch the extent this program at the University of Wisconsin makes it possible to increase the educational attainment of your state. The editorial board at the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel also voiced its optimism, saying, quote, we have high hopes for this program. It's a pragmatic design that should allow many hardworking people to finally finish their degrees. We all know, I think, that this is still very much a work in progress, but with the continued dedication and enthusiasm and innovative spirit of our faculty and staff who have now begun to move the programs you'll hear about shortly into the flexible format, I have every reason to think that it will be a very successful initiative. We're on the leading edge with this flex option. Chancellor Ward spoke in his remarks a few minutes ago about new pathways to competencies, and that's exactly what this flex option is about. The findings of a recent national opinion poll, I think, suggest we're on the right track with it. According to a survey by Northeastern University in Boston, 83% of Americans say that higher education must innovate for the United States to maintain its global leadership. While 7 in 10 Americans agree that higher education is extremely or very important to achieving the American dream, they are also calling for change in how we do business. Access and affordability obviously continue to be major issues according to the survey, and a majority of Americans support innovations that would help defray the cost of higher education. We think our flex option will help there as well. So here to tell us more about where we are in this journey is Interim Provost and Vice Chancellor for UW Extension, Aaron Brower. Aaron.
Thank you, President Riley and Regent Smith. Thanks for the opportunity to give you this update. I was told to talk right into this thing. Update on the flex degree option. There really has been quite a bit of change since the last time we talked. Before I get started, I want to tell you that I have followed Chancellor Ward in speaking in the past, and everyone sounds like a dullard after him, so don't hold that against me. One of the things, actually, I want to say as a segue to what Chancellor Ward mentioned is that the flexible option is a way to try and increase opportunities for students as a way to receive degrees. It's not meant at all to replace what we currently do. So more choice is the goal. What I'm going to do is go through these slides relatively quickly, and then we'll have ample time for discussion. Okay, so a couple quick highlights on what's changed since the last time we've talked. We do have a new official name. Flex Degree we found through lots of discussion and also through market research we did with Hebing that name really isn't accurate, and in fact has some misleading qualities to it. What we really are doing here, of course, is having a flexible option to existing campus degrees. So we're moving the name to UW Flexible Option, or UW Flex as the short version of that. We have a group of programs that are the brave souls who have come forward. I'll describe those in a minute. With those programs, we're starting to do program development, which is really very exciting. And we've established 2 and soon to be establishing the 3rd oversight or advisory group to help us with various components of this program. Last week we did have a press event. The Cohort 1 programs were announced. We also launched the website flex.wisconsin.edu, and we had a YouTube video produced that we'll show you in a moment to describe what the flex option is. We had really fantastic press coverage, both national, local, very regional stories, because particularly through UW colleges, there were lots of individual county faculty participating in the first round, and so lots of good stories all across the board. The hits on the website went from increased almost 600%, so we really were successful in driving some of that as well. In the first cohort, UW-Milwaukee and UW colleges are the first lead institutions. At Milwaukee, we have 4 degree programs and 1 certificate program, 2 nursing degrees, an RN to BSN program, an RN to Masters of Nursing program, a bachelor's degree in diagnostic imaging, a bachelor's in information science and technology, and a professional and technical communications certificate through the College of Letters and Science. At UW colleges, 16 of the 18 departments have identified 1 or 2 courses, so a total of about 25 courses are going to be converted into this flexible format. The intent is to create a portfolio of courses that allow a student to get an associate's degree in this flexible format. And the intent of that associate's degree is to provide the general education foundation that would allow students to transfer either to residential programs or to other flexible option programs. We also have some pilot courses that are starting pretty much right now without any advertising at all. Well, the courses and a non-degree certificate are a college algebra course, an elementary statistics course, and a certificate in business math and personal finance. The intent of this pilot is that we want to study what we're doing. We are certain we're going to make mistakes. If we're charging students full freight for that, we figure, well, we want to avoid that. So what we're doing is for the first 100 students who are enrolling in these pilot courses, they'll get a research stipend that'll make the cost free to them in exchange for allowing us to then survey them and learn from their experiences. We haven't advertised this. Our enrollment already is, as you see there, 11 in the algebra, as of this morning actually, 11 in the algebra course, 9 in statistics, 5 in the certificate program. We also got some other interesting data on who else has been interested in the programs. On the website, there's a place where you can sign in and request more information, and also we ask them their own interests. So of the programs that were listed, the Milwaukee programs, the colleges programs, we see a pretty nice spread. There's about 127 students who currently have signed up for more information specifically for the programs that are developed. And there's a pretty nice spread pretty evenly across all of those programs. The education level of the students who are already signing up for these hits our target audiences. In other words, most have some college. About a third of the students have some college. Interestingly, about half have a college degree, and so they're interested in some kind of retraining through this program. Beyond that, the other interesting statistic was that the average age of the students who have signed up is 38. In addition to the programs that I've just mentioned, UW Superior has 2 courses, an art history course and a communications course that they are going to develop and will be ready to enroll students in the fall. Parkside is considering a bachelor's in general studies, which will be a new degree program for them. That'll probably take them 2 years to develop, so they're looking at fall of 14. And then I've been in conversation with 3 other campuses about programs that they're exploring with their faculty. So let me show you the video that was produced by David Scapel and his unit, Continuing Education and Online E-Learning, and that comes up a different way. Is that right, Peter? So this is a 2-minute video that's now on YouTube.
What do you think about higher education? The conventional education model consists of 3 essential elements: teaching, learning, and assessment. Students learn, access resources, and are assessed within a physical or virtual space. However, recent developments in technology allow the decoupling of these 3 elements, providing greater flexibility for both students and faculty. The University of Wisconsin Flexible Degree Model is designed to make higher education more accessible and affordable while maintaining high standards. When we decouple the teaching, learning, and assessment components of the education model, students are able to take full advantage of free educational resources available online and elsewhere. They can then demonstrate their knowledge through robust, reliable assessment. This approach also enables faculty to focus more attention on students and utilize the rich array of instructional materials available in multiple formats. The UW Flexible Degree Model allows students and faculty to engage on a more individual and personal level. Through the UW Flexible Degree Model, students demonstrate mastery and understanding by completing a set of competencies that build to the degree. Students can choose how to approach these competencies based on their prior education or job experience. For example, the student who is confident in the subject can choose to take an assessment to complete their competency without having to do coursework on the material they already know. Students who desire more instruction can choose their level of educational involvement and use a wide variety of materials and resources, including free online coursework and content from the University of Wisconsin System System and other institutions. Students are free to start or stop the program at any time and move among competencies at their own pace. The UW Flexible Degree Model is designed to allow students to seek out only what they need, rather than spend time and money on instruction from beyond requirement. Competencies are thoughtfully developed by faculty and industry experts, resulting in a tailored and valuable educational experience. The UW Flexible Degree Model is an exciting evolution of higher education. Its unique design makes it more accessible and addresses the varied and ever-changing needs and goals of students.
The response actually to this option video has been really fantastic. So I want to thank David and his crew for putting that together. It really was terrific. Okay, so a couple key elements from the video that get highlighted that really identify what is this flexible option. Again, as you all know, it's competency-based with progression to degrees through rigorous assessments, controlled by faculty and departments that are managing those existing degrees. It's supported by strong advising, proactive, we're calling kind of wraparound advising. Whatever it is that students need is what we aspire to give them, a mix of advising, mentoring, and tutoring. Prior learning and experiences of students really shape all aspects of the educational experience, where a student starts, what kind of knowledge they come in with, the foundation they have, and how they move forward. Quality, again, is really grounded in the existing faculty and departments, and in many ways this is really the distinctive, one of the main distinctive features of the flex option for a UW system versus Western Governors or other programs that are being developed. We're building this onto the pride and the commitment that faculty have in their programs. And again, it's aimed at non-traditional and returning students. In the packets that you received, the materials that you've received, there's a document that we're calling the Who, What, Where document, which has been now the kind of basic written piece of material that is aimed at our internal audiences. How do we describe this to our own faculty, staff, administrators? This has been developed through one of the advisory groups, the Faculty and Staff Advisory Group. That group did really good work to try and identify what the common understanding of the flexible degree option is, even though on that group everyone doesn't agree about the value of this flexible option. So we've had some really quite good discussions about it. This one is really, we've kind of covered this, but in contrast to traditional degrees, there is no seat time, there are no semesters or terms. Again, there's individual proactive advising rather than a reactive advising that is more common for our programs. And self-paced encompasses a lot of different things: length of time to complete, number of assessments that may be needed, and the type of support that's needed. Moving forward, we have several different components that really need a lot of work now. Of course, the academic components, developing the assessments, developing the competencies. We have operational components. How do we support the programs through advising, admissions, financial aid, the IT structures that are needed, transcription, transfer issues. It's almost a kind of, well, it's a scary list for us. We have financial components. We're working on setting tuition and pricing. And then we've got marketing and communication components that we need to develop as well. We really need to get people to sign up for this in order for this to be a successful program. This slide represents, we are starting to both hear from external stakeholders as well as thinking ourselves, what would success look like in these programs? So we're beginning to sketch this out, and there's already a kind of interesting question that gets raised even as you start thinking about what success is in flex option. So enrollments, we clearly want people enrolled in these programs. Second, we want, and numbers of programs spreading, that would be another mark of success. Retention rates and progress towards degree are important indicators that students are being successful in this program. The time to degree and completion rates should be reasonable. What that means, we don't yet know. There's some comparisons around the country we can benchmark against, but time to degree is certainly something we want to keep track of. And then ultimately, the people who are graduating from this program, their degrees or certificates or other products of this program are really generating employability. So the issue that kind of comes up here pretty quickly is that for many students, they may take some component of a flexible degree option and never receive the degree. But if they're employable with a certain certificate in quantitative reasoning, in mobile apps, in whatever it may be, professional communications, that's got to be seen as a success. So we're going to have to figure out how to be nuanced about saying students may proceed to a degree, but they actually, in this new world, the degree in and of itself may not be the only way to be successful particularly in the work world. If you want to go to the website, again, the simpler version of this is flex.wisconsin.edu. The flexible site right now resides in the eCampus site as a way to help students see that it's actually one among many kinds of online options that we're offering to students. The last thing I want to do is actually thank a range of people. This really has been a tremendous amount of work, and a lot of people have contributed towards this. First of all, the governor and staff members in his office. All of you as Regents have provided terrific support. President Riley, President Nook and Morgan, their staffs, Chancellors Cross and Lovell, in particular being kind of brave to be on the front end, along with Provost Britz, Lampy, and their staffs, the faculty, deans, and department chairs at Milwaukee colleges and also at Superior, who have really stepped forward to be these pioneers. The members of the various advisory groups, again, a faculty staff advisory group, we have an administrative advisory group and an operations group. And then I'm really up here representing a core team, David Scable and Rebecca Kiroff. That's the name that came out of the past. Rebecca Kiroff. I couldn't have asked for better partners in this, and I really thank them wholeheartedly. So let me stop and then see what kinds of questions we might want to talk about.
Let me ask my first question. Our first concern, one of our concerns when we came up with this conference, was to make sure it was understood this was going to be faculty-driven.
Yes.
Faculty participation, faculty from A to Z. And we set up, I think, a group statewide to, how is that coming as far as the reception on our campuses by our faculty of this concept?
Yeah, you know, honestly, it's been going really very well. There were kind of predictable initial discussions about what is this, in particular, how was it announced, and there was some confusion about over the summer how it was announced. After getting through that first discussion, the conversations are quite good. We make it clear this is voluntary. You know, there's no system is not forcing this on institutions. Those programs that see the value, particularly in this early round, who are the brave souls, because we are creating as we're going, the reception has been really very good. If you remember, just as one data point here, 2 months ago when we first were talking to you about this, we were hoping for 1, maybe 2 degree programs that we would have going as a pilot this year. We have 4. 5 including the certificate, which is a very rich certificate. So I would say the conversations have been really very good. We continue, the nature of this program gets at the heart of what people feel education is. And so I personally like those conversations, but those are important, difficult conversations. And so we continue to have those. As recently as last Friday in our faculty staff advisory group, we continue to discuss the different components of the program and how to assure quality. What does quality really mean? Are we, unintended consequences and those things? So it's really been, it's been great.
Regent Higgins.
Thank you, President Smith. Aaron, I first have to congratulate you and the members of all your various teams on pulling this together so quickly and so broadly. You did a wonderful job.
Thank you.
And we appreciate all that effort. I know we're early on in the process, but I'm a little concerned about the definition that we're picking for the flex degree, specifically the no seat time aspect. I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to visit UW-Oshkosh on Tuesday, and we were talking about a program that involves education technology that will bring together an employee's learning experience on the manufacturing floor with the ability to integrate credits earned at a technical college or at the UW two-year campus with the faculty inputs from Oshkosh and Green Bay. So there would be seat time involved somewhere, but the employee would still have the opportunity to test, for life experiences, et cetera, et cetera. And so my concern is that at some point we should really be calling those things flex programs also, because even though they do require or expect, you will have employees coming with sometime with their butts in a seat in a classroom, it's still very flexible and very tuned to somebody who is a non-traditional student who lives in an area, has a wife, family, husband, and children, and still making it easy to get the degree. So I guess my question is that in the cards, or you picked the hardest part to take first?
Right. Right. That's true. So there's really, I think, two parts to your question. One is, are we inadvertently leaving out programs because of let's call it a requirement that there be no seat time? And shouldn't we count programs like you're describing really as additional flexible options? And I would say yes, absolutely. The other part of it is, in principle, what are the principles that we're basing the flex option on? And in the flex option, in principle, there isn't required seat time. Now, of the range of students who will be successful through the program, a very small fraction will simply fly through assessments and never engage in classroom-type activities. The majority will need more. They may take those from us. They may take them in self-designed ways. They may use the MOOCs. They may do a whole variety of things. But what we're trying to define the program around is that the requirement is really also a customized approach rather than this requiring a certain percentage of seat time, so to speak. Now, years from now, maybe even next year, won't there be a variety of other options, just like the one you're describing, that qualify under a flex option? Yeah, I think so. I certainly wouldn't want to be dogmatic about saying, no, that won't count. You've got to call it something different. But you're understanding the principle here of trying to separate out the classroom activity from the assessments themselves.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Regent Woodburn. I'm sorry.
A couple of questions. One on expectations. Expectations with regard to the program are massive. In the announcement of the initial 4 programs, page 1 stories in our major newspapers once again. And, I recall the initiative is grounded in an understanding that we have 700,000 adults who've dropped out, 1 in 5. And this is meant to be our strategy to step up to get more degrees into the done pile, which is also consistent with our strategic planning, where we find ourselves underperforming in terms of percentage of adults with degrees. The other thing is that, as we know, we're asking for millions of dollars in the upcoming budget, as this is a centerpiece of our policy initiatives for the university system as we go to the legislature. Are we going to start seeing some specifics with regard to timelines and scaling up of the program?
Yes. So my hair was gray coming into this job, and it's grayer still based on the expectations you're describing. They are high. There's no question about it. So the programs that are in this first cohort are committing to enroll students in the fall, next fall. So that's one timeline that's there. This first year of ramp up will be an awful lot of work, but this is what those programs are committing to. And again, I really congratulate the faculty and departments and provosts and chancellors of those institutions who are really stepping forward. So the administrative group, which is composed of several chancellors, provosts, CBOs, student affairs folks, enrollment management folks, their primary job is to look at the budget and business model estimations moving forward and how we're estimating this program going forward. So we have some pretty specific assumptions built into the model about growth in enrollment as well as costs on the front end. So yeah, we absolutely have that. I'm reluctant to share those right now because that group is really in the midst of it. They're actually going to be meeting tomorrow morning. This will be their third meeting, and there's 6 scheduled. We should have some more concrete information to share by February. We need to grow both in range of programs. I think the programs that are listed are actually logical ones. They're professionally oriented programs that have accrediting bodies themselves that are using competency-based language in their accreditation, so it makes sense. But we need to develop the range of those programs so that it really meets both the demands in the workforce and also student demands. So yeah, you're putting your finger right on one really critical piece.
I as well would like to thank you for the hard work. I know this has been an innovative new approach, and as the non-traditional student representative, I'd like to add that my peers have been quite excited about this. I, however, have some questions as well, more about the nuts and bolts, how this is going to work for the adults who actually do this. As we all understand that you're uncoupling the learning from the assessment, and most of the learning will probably be done online due to the demands on the lives of these people, the place-bound aspects of it. However, I'd like to stress that it is my understanding, is it not, that if the individual learner feels that they can avail themselves of the rich resources at their local UW college, either 2-year or 4-year comprehensive institution, that they can take the classes there to get what they need for this assessment. And it seems to me that you see that happening quite a bit. So my final question would be, do you foresee that this is very individualized? Every person is going to be different, both with, I'm sure the tuition aspect is going to be interesting. You'll have to figure out how to do that. And also the advising. But do you foresee this falling into patterns where a percentage of people are in maybe the same situation where they either have an associate degree or they have so many credits of college where when you're working with recruiting students, or even maybe later on success metrics, you can say that this pattern, this group of people, this is what it took them to finish in terms of both time and money. And these were the successes they had. And that was the question that I'd like you to address, if you could.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Tracy, and actually thank you for your participation in the press conference. I really got a lot of good feedback about, actually we were thinking about how do we take you on the road as we're talking about this. You did a terrific job.
You're very welcome. I was happy to do it.
So to just respond to the first part of what you were saying, yes, absolutely. In fact, what we imagine happening is, remember, there'll be some small fraction who breeze through assessments. The rest of the people are going to need more engagement, and the advising model, this wraparound advising, mentoring, coaching model will be aimed at that. Part of the job of that person will be to point students to materials or courses or resources that the student should take advantage of based on where they are in this process, what they know, and where their goals are, which will include exactly what you're saying, courses that our institutions provide. So yes, absolutely. In terms of the other part of it, sort of will there be patterns? I suspect yes. I think there really will be. I think that'll be part of the enrollment process. What we imagine is this program will be aimed at a pretty wide range of people. I would say some of them may not actually succeed in this program, and we want to make sure we're not, I'm going to overstate this, so I'll probably get in trouble for it. We're not going to do what the for-profits are doing, which is to market the hell out of our program just to bring in revenue and then, bring in people who aren't going to be successful. But even for the ones who will be successful, I think we're going to need to do some kind of front-end interviewing. You know, what are your goals? What are you interested in? Here's what we can provide. Here's what this model offers. And talking about some of the patterns that we might see will be a really good part of that process. So, but your question also raises another interesting part of this, which is, will there be opportunity for group learning for students? Right? Now, there's no seat time, so to speak, although there may be courses that students take. But advisors will have cohorts of students that they will advise, plus a student going through a nursing program, as you're saying, probably will be similar to other students going through nursing, maybe in the same region or whatever. So how do we build in some of the opportunity for some peer-to-peer support and learning and other activities? And that actually is something we've started thinking about. We don't have a good answer yet, but boy, if we don't take advantage of it, we'll be missing out on something that would be useful for students.
Thank you.
Chancellor Wells.
Thank my colleague Aaron Bauer and Ray and UW-Milwaukee people and the first wave of institutions that got out on the leading edge of this very exciting and very challenging effort to do a better job providing another option for non-traditional adults to access a good high-quality education. And we just wanted to say, kind of UW-Oshkosh and a lot of us, we've got your back. So we're glad that you're out there on the bleeding edge, and we'll come around when you figure out all the good parts. But I also want to take this opportunity to build on Regent Higgins and Whitburn's point about there are a lot of people in the state of Wisconsin who stopped out, hundreds of thousands of them. And I want to make sure that we don't assume that we have not been doing things in the past and recently and redoubling efforts to get at that group and to give them an opportunity to get back in and finish. And I'll just give you a couple examples. UW-Oshkosh was, I think, the second university in the country to develop a graduation project about 6-7 years ago where we contacted stop-outs, starting with people who stopped out and were seniors but hadn't graduated yet, and customized a way to get them back in, give them options, help them complete their degrees. And I think we're approaching now 400 baccalaureate degrees have been awarded to that group of students over that period of time. Several of our sister institutions have since launched graduation projects as well. And there are, as Regent Higgins was saying, I'm really delighted he spent all day at Oshkosh yesterday, which for some people would be difficult, I guess, looking over a lot of different programs. But there are a lot of things, this whole notion, this whole concept of what's flexible and what is responsive to people who need to have greater convenience because their lives are much more complicated, say, than a typical person. So as we got this really great attention and are really taking on this transformative way of getting at that group, we also should take the opportunity to point out other things that we're doing that are also enabling access to the high-quality education that UW institutions get. So, Aaron, thank you for getting out there. Don't bleed too much.
Thanks. Actually, there are, back to Regent Smith, your question about responsiveness. It really has been rewarding to have discussions on almost every single campus that I've been on and the kinds of supports that are there. So I don't have much to add to what you're saying, Rick, except to say that this is providing, the flex option provides one additional opportunity, I think, among many. Again, if we think about Chancellor Ward's comments this morning, we need to be innovative in every way we could possibly imagine, not only in the educational enterprise, but the business model that supports that educational enterprise. And this will be one option, and then there really needs to be continued efforts in every way that we think is good education.
Good. Yes, thank you, Regent Smith. I wanted to compliment Aaron and thank him for the great work that he's done with colleagues David and Rebecca. It's a big, steep hill that they're climbing, but they're on their way, and it's been great to see them get to where they are today. So I really want to compliment them for all the hard work that they've been doing, and look forward to their success as they move this whole project forward. I did want to piggyback a little bit on what Chancellor Wells said and what Aaron just said, and to Regent Whitburn's question about the 750,000 students who have some credit and no degree. There are many ways we're trying to serve them. Another reminder there is that we now have 4,600 courses in the UW system online that you can take fully online. We have over 100 degree and certificate programs right now that you can complete wholly online without ever coming, if you don't want to a UW campus. There are as many different styles of learning and desires to acquire knowledge as there are learners. And we will have some students for whom a flex option is not attractive at all. We will have some who do their entire degree using that. We will have some who will take a mix of classroom, online, and competency assessment. I mean, back again to the new pathways to demonstrating competency. That's what this is. It's another pathway to get us to where we need to go to be the leading university of the future. And then let me go back to Regent Smith in this initial question and just give you a little anecdote about, as an answer to it. He asked about the faculty support. And a couple of months ago now, I guess it was, Chancellor Ford and Associate Provost, or Provost now, Acting Provost Ebaid were nice enough to invite me down to UW Parkside to the Business Schools Advisory Council, and Regent Rybar was at that meeting as well. So we talked to them about this idea. And Aaron, you were there.
I was there the previous week.
The previous one, yeah, that's right. So you weren't at the one we were at. But the one we were at, after we talked about it, Fred broke us out into tables to meet with smaller groups of this advisory council. And these are mostly local business people. This is the College of Business, Computer Science, their new school down there. So very supportive, interested, and the conversation was very interesting because what I found was a number of the business people were saying, well, wait a minute, is there going to be quality in this degree program? I mean, if we hire somebody who gets their degree from one of these flex options, can we be assured that they'll cut the mustard when they come in? Will the quality of their learning, the level of their learning be equivalent to somebody who takes a traditional degree program? Was at the bottom of some of the nervousness around the table. And interestingly enough, there were faculty there too. And what started to happen was the faculty started to say, oh yes, no, we can do this. Here's how it'll work. Here's how we'll assess the competency. So the dynamic was kind of flipped, interestingly. And then toward the end of the session, when they got back and had a chance to ask us some more questions, that same question came up, and my answer was right back to your question. The same faculty will be assessing these students as assess the traditional students, and they will decide according to the same standards in their disciplines, in their degree programs, whether these students indeed have learned what they need to know to be awarded the credential. Pretty simple answer, but back to that notion, Regent Smith, that the faculty are the ones who will be the guarantors of quality for the university, for the students, for the business folks who want to hire our graduates. But I just thought it was a little, this is a complicated subject, and the dialogues kind of go around in different kinds of spirals sometimes when you get into it with people both inside and outside the university.
Thank you, Aaron. Appreciate it. Next, I'm going to call on Chancellor Dennis Shields to update the board on the strategic goals at UW-Platteville. If you recall that these are rotating updates in response to our interest in staying more informed as the individual campus's specific interests and goals. We started this series of reports at UW-Stout, and you just heard from Interim Chancellor Ward about UW-Madison strategic initiatives, and today's presentation on UW-Platteville continues that series. Chancellor Shields.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for the opportunity to come talk about the University of Wisconsin-Platteville. Let me start by thanking a number of the regents have, in the last few months, ventured down to Platteville and spent a day or two getting to know us. I can tell you that the members of the University of Wisconsin-Platteville community appreciate the sincere interest and the evidence of it by coming and spending a day with us. I will be joined today in making this presentation by Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs, Minnie Nimmox Denherter, who recently got married, so that's why I have to really think about what I should call her. I'd also like to thank the staff of my other Vice Chancellor, Robert Kramer, and for the work that they did to put together this presentation. And I'll give them a disclaimer. Everything that you like, they get the credit for. Everything you don't like, you can blame on me. Let me start by saying that at the core of everything that we do at the University of Wisconsin-Platteville is our concern for students and strong student outcomes. We are, and we're very proud of this, a point of access, and access doesn't mean anything unless affordability is thrown in there. That's what drives what we do. And the further framing I would give you is that, as I think echoing what Chancellor Ward did so ably this morning, the core concern that campus leaders across the system have is about resources. And resources both in managing and developing the human capital we have on our campuses, developing and stewarding the funds that support what we do, and attentiveness to the physical environment. It drives what campus leadership is about in this day and age. And I think that's a shift. So, getting to what is the University of Platteville? We're known for our high-impact practices, applied education, and a special emphasis on STEM fields and agriculture, biology, business, criminal justice, education, and industrial technology. Over the last decade, we've been the fastest growing of the University of Wisconsin system schools. We've had a significant increase in Wisconsin residents in our enrollment, and a very successful Tri-State Initiative program, which I will talk about a little bit later. I think this is driven primarily by the nature, quality, and strength of our academic programs, and also by our affordability. Our students are in high demand. What you see there is a sense of what other things are going on campus. This fall, we had a career fair that was attended by 2,200 students and alumni. We had over 255 employers attend, and one of the exciting pieces of it, 45 new employers. We survey those employers when they come to campus, and they tell us the reason why they're so interested in our students is that we have the key majors they are seeking, our students are talented, and our graduates are well prepared to enter the workforce. A part of the reason why our academic programs are so in tune with industry is because we have long-standing advisory boards that help guide our academic programs. Those boards are populated by employers, industry partners, and alumni, and they meet regularly. In most cases, they meet twice a year on our campuses. To give you a sense of what our top majors are, you'll see that they are in high demand areas. In addition to these, we have, and in keeping with the just prior program, we've been a pioneer in flexible degree programs. We have collaborative programs in engineering, both electrical and mechanical, at 2 other sites in the state, and we're adding a third. Those sites are Fox Valley and Rock County, and we're newly added one in Washington County. These allow place-bound students to advance their careers and get the training and degrees that are in high demand in their area. And those collaborative programs also provide continuing education and career options for place-bound students. We're also being innovative in adding new programs in response to the interest by our workforce. 7 new degrees are being offered, developed with the input and guidance from our external advisory boards and emerging industries. Microsystems and nanotechnologies, sustainable and renewable energy systems highlight that. We're real excited about our minors that were just added in social and environmental justice, and entrepreneurship. These minors in entrepreneurship provide no matter what discipline is the major of a student, the opportunity for students to learn about entrepreneurship and translate that experience into innovation as they go out into the workforce. In addition to this, we have online graduate degrees that we've added in supply chain management, organizational change, and distance education leadership, all burgeoning fields. I know enrollment will be a hot topic in other parts of this meeting, so this is a visual of how our enrollment has grown over the last 8 years. You can see 39% in 8 years. Even more remarkable has been the growth in our distance learning program, which is also evidence that this notion of providing opportunities to place-bound students is not a new concept in the system or on our campus. Our distance learning program will be celebrating its 35th anniversary this January, and by our calculation, it was the first distance learning program established in the system. This visual shows that more than half of our bachelor's degrees granted are in STEM fields, which are high-demand fields. And I think I believe one of the reasons why our students are such high demand is even in the STEM fields, we're grounding our students in liberal arts that makes them critical thinkers, analytical thinkers who have the ability to communicate. I think that echoes part of what Chancellor Ward mentioned earlier this morning. The growth in enrollment, I think, shows that our families and our students recognize the value of this combination of both technical skills and liberal arts background. Let me give a little more background about the Tri-State Initiative. I'm going to do this in 2 stages. First, this about enrollment, and also later in the second half of my presentation, how this is impacting the education on our campus for all of our students. I know that a number of regents are new and may not be as familiar with this program. It's essentially a cost recovery program that Illinois and Iowa students pay tuition and fees plus $4,000 compared to Wisconsin residents. These are directed at majors in high need disciplines, and the revenue, which is will provide over $14 million this year to our campus, supports 164 faculty and staff. I should note that 35 of those are staff whose funding for those positions were at one time on GPR dollars. The other positions support the growth in enrollment in terms of, since we've grown 39%. Even with this Tri-State Initiative, you will see that our resident enrollment, this has not impacted the access that residents of Wisconsin have to an education at the University of Wisconsin-Platteville. That enrollment has grown by close to 1,000 students. The target enrollment for Tri-State Initiative students when the program was established was 2,000 students, so we still have some room to grow there. The fact of the matter is that our Tri-State Initiative has provided valuable resources that has improved the educational opportunities for all students on our campus. I'm going to turn the presentation over to Provost Denherter now, who will describe our strategic planning process and elaborate on our goals that we've set for ourselves.
Thank you, Chancellor Shields, and good morning to all of you. Our strategic planning process began in December 2011, and historically, UW-Platteville has had a very top-down strategic planning process, if you want to call it that. And when Dennis Shields came on board, he said he wanted to do things differently, that we wanted to have a more structured, intentional strategic planning process, and wanted it to be more inclusive so the entire campus could own it, could see their role in it, and feel very strongly and positively about it. So about a year ago, UW-Platteville began the strategic planning process. As I said, it was collaborative and inclusive, and it was headed by a 15-member steering committee representing people from all constituencies on campus. And we're very pleased that, in fact, over 700 people provided input. We had to be somewhat intrusive and aggressive in soliciting some of that input, but we did have quite a bit of participation. And emerging from that planning process were 4 strategic priorities. Not surprising, the first and most important one is to provide an outstanding education to our students. We're defining that in multiple ways. As Chancellor Shields mentioned, we have been known for our hands-on education, specifically in STEM programs, but based very strongly in a liberal education foundation. But we're also defining that as having a global perspective which prepares individuals for problem-solving and facing issues of today, but also realizing that they need those critical thinking skills, global perspectives in order to solve the problems that we don't even know about right now. So that's our main strategic priority. Diversity is very important to us, collaboration and lifelong learning. So another strategic priority is to foster a community of achievement and respect where the individual and differences among individuals are understood and respected. The third strategic priority borrows from Chancellor Shields' own verbiage, talking about controlling our own destiny. This has to do with creating, maintaining, investing well our resources, not just financial and physical space resources, but more importantly our human capital, developing that so that everyone who works and learns at our institution are meeting their potential. Chancellor Shields will mention, again, echoing Chancellor Ward's words, that flexibility is key in controlling our own destiny. We expect to be accountable for that flexibility. And finally, we are core to the Tri-States region, not just as an educational engine, but also as an economic engine and a cultural center. I don't have time to discuss in great detail our strategic plan, but I did want to focus on 2 specific goals, some of the challenges we face in reaching those goals, and some of the programs and initiatives we put in place to reach them. A priority goal for us is to increase our first to second year retention rate. We're doing a really great job at recruiting students, but we recognize that we have to do better at retaining them. Over the last 10 years, as you can see from this chart, we've averaged approximately 76% retention rate from the first to second year. Our goal now is to get that retention rate to 80%, and we believe that while that is a stretch goal for us, that it is something that we can do, and we are putting in place programs to reach that goal. Some challenges we face in meeting this goal include the fact that we have a significant population of first-generation students, and as you know, that those are students who do not have a parent or an older sibling who have already navigated college life, and so sometimes they feel that they don't belong at a university, and sometimes they don't know what services are available or even what questions to ask. So we are addressing the needs of those students. We also recognize that our students have to work to put themselves through college, and with increasing college costs, some of them are working greater and longer hours. A challenge not unique to Platteville is that more and more of our entering freshmen do not come prepared for college-level coursework. Specifically, we see gaps in math and English proficiencies that we have to address. And we're always mindful that part of UW-Platteville's identity and mission is affordability and accessibility. And so we need to make sure that the students that we get to campus, we in fact nurture and provide the services that are needed to get them to graduation. So here are some of the ways we're addressing these challenges. I'm not going to go through all of these. I do want to talk about a few of them. First of all is our Summer Bridge program. We launched it last summer, and the results, we've been assessing the results of this program, was that it has been highly successful, and we increased the number of students. We aimed this at students who had been identified as high at-risk students. First year cohort was 20 students. Last year, with the help of an external grant, we got that up to 50 students. And according to our assessment, 95% of those students are still in school, and the qualitative assessment indicates that they found the program extremely helpful. We also have a first-year experience program to help entering freshmen navigate college life, and we've redone our general education requirements so that starting in fall 14, every student on campus will be required to have that Intro to College Life course. Research has shown that students who live on campus their freshman and sophomore years are more likely to be retained and to succeed, and that has been part of the impetus and urgency behind increasing the number of residence halls on campus, and I know that Chancellor Shields will be talking to you about that later. We've also introduced living learning communities as a mechanism for increasing retention, increasing the support students feel, and the rootedness in campus that make them more successful and more likely to persist. We also know that high-impact practices increase student engagement and retention. They also develop what our employers want, which is the critical thinking, communication, and problem-solving skills. We continue to focus on providing high-quality, hands-on education and training both inside and outside the classroom so that our students will be fully prepared to enter the workforce. My goal is that all of our students will be involved in at least one high-impact practice before they graduate. And you see here listed 3 of the high-impact practices that we are focusing on, and we want at least 25% of our students to have engaged in one of these high-impact practices, to have some kind of international experience, a service learning experience, or an undergraduate research experience by the time that they graduate. Service learning projects, as I mentioned earlier, are a high-impact practice that aid in achieving our retention goal. We know that students who engage in service learning are more likely to be successful and to be retained and to graduate. Service learning projects are educational activities where students work under the supervision of a faculty or staff member to complete a needed project with a community partner. And the community partners that our students have engaged in have included governmental entities, nonprofit organizations, and businesses. And to encourage the increase in service learning, we established many years ago our Pioneer Activity Center for Community Engagement, also called our PACE Center. And through this, students have the opportunity to practice what they've learned in the classroom. Just a couple of examples of some PACE projects. As you can see here in the slide, just this last year we had 1,000 students involved in service learning with over 100 community partners. You can see in the top right-hand corner there, some of our mechanical engineering students were asked to develop customized classroom equipment, exercise equipment, and toys for students with children with special needs. You'll see in the left side, the slide, our students who participated in Engineers Without Borders built this slide doesn't show that, but they actually were engaged in building a bridge for a small community in Ghana that allowed students to continue walking to school even during the rainy flood season. So a first important goal is to increase our freshman to sophomore retention rate, but a second important goal is to get those students to graduation in a timely fashion. It's not just enough to retain our students. We want them to graduate with minimal debt and the ability to succeed in their chosen path. Our 4-year graduation rate is currently at 19%, and we want to get that to 25%. It is a struggle for us for a variety of reasons. Our students, as I mentioned earlier, frequently come with gaps in their math and English skills, and so they have to take additional coursework to fill in those gaps. Also because of our program array, students frequently are involved in co-op or internship experiences, which doesn't necessarily have to, but sometimes occasions a delay in graduation. We've been implementing programs to increase student retention, but also those same programs that I've mentioned previously do have an impact on graduation rates. Some of the things that we've done, in addition to the programs I've already mentioned, is to implement policies to help students understand the importance of taking their coursework seriously. We're restricting the number of times a student can repeat a class. And we're also requiring the completion of developmental or remedial courses early in a student's career if they are to continue. Finally, we are investigating the possibility of a year-round school with a full-blown summer semester that would allow students to graduate in a more timely fashion. I think that the importance of degree completion is clearly understood across campus. Faculty and staff have been working on many other initiatives other than those that I've mentioned to support our recruitment, retention, and graduation of our students. With this slide, I'd like to highlight one of the initiatives that will aid in recruitment and retention. Last August, we were delighted. The National Science Foundation approved $900,000 in funding to UW-Platteville to create an engineering, mathematics, and science recruitment and retention center. The center will work collaboratively with campus resources, providing tailored support to help our STEM students attain graduation and find employment quickly. We feel that this center will ensure that UW-Platteville continues to stay on the cutting edge of developing STEM disciplines, which provides area employers with highly educated, highly trained individuals who have the skills needed to help companies become more innovative and competitive in the global economy. In talking to some of those employers at the employment fair that the Chancellor mentioned earlier, one of the things that they say about UW-Platteville graduates is that they come with the experience necessary. They don't have to spend as much time training our students because they already have a lot of the skills needed. Finally, I wanted to talk to you about entrepreneurship. The Chancellor mentioned that we've just instituted an entrepreneurship minor, which is for all students, not just students in the business areas. And we are fostering an entrepreneurial spirit in our students to keep them more actively engaged, again, going back to helping retention and graduation rates. Entrepreneurship and innovation are long-standing academic traditions and high priorities at UW-Platteville. Some of the initiatives and activities that we've begun in terms of student innovation are the Center for Undergraduate Research and Creative Endeavors, a pioneer launch lab through which students and faculty and staff can launch a product or a service that they have created. Again, the entrepreneurship minor. We have competitions, and one of those is the elevator pitch competition. We also have a business plan competition that students engage in. And I wanted to share with you this quotation of Tom Aronson, who's an industrial technology management major, who placed second in this year's elevator pitch competition. It occurred just a couple of weeks ago. We asked the students to give us input on the experience, and as you can see, he wrote, "You can't catch your dreams if you're not out there chasing them." And so one of the things that we're about is to help our students get out there and chase their dreams. I'm now going to turn the floor back over to Chancellor Shields, who's going to discuss some other initiatives we've put in place to strengthen the economy of the Tri-States region.
Thanks, Mitty. We are the largest employer in Southwest Wisconsin. So by our very existence, we are the elephant in the room in that area. One of my major initiatives is to become more connected with the region, to work closely, first starting with the City Council, but also with all of the employers in the region and extending over across that Great Divide, the Mississippi River, to Dubuque, which is the largest city within a 30 or 40 mile radius, but is also a center of industry. John Deere and a number of other employers hire many of our students. The bankers in that region hire a significant number of our graduates. And so we have to be engaged to make a difference. I recall when I first drove into Platteville on July 1st of 2010, expecting that I was coming to a town of 10,000 people with this fabulous university attached to it. On my arrival, I realized that the 10,000 included the university, which was not daunting. I'm a small-town guy, but it did change my perspective. But even there, for example, the impact that our university has on the local economy, there's a company called Esterline that grew out of a garage that does software development for Rockwell and Boeing and et cetera, and that came directly out of the intellectual capital that was based on our campus in our engineering and our computer and software engineering program. It has approximately 200 employees. They have a couple of different sites, but about 160 of those employees are graduates of the University of Wisconsin-Platteville. So that is the model of what we're trying to do. Some of what we're aspects are, for example, the Center for New Ventures, which is our effort to be intentional about capitalizing on the intellectual capital that's present on our faculty and our students. It is a center that will help them leverage their ideas and their efforts to get them to market, to get them engaged in industry that can make use of their efforts. We also are in the early stages of developing an innovation center. Our vision is that this would be a state-of-the-art facility for applied research, innovation, and consultation and entrepreneurship, and provide infrastructure to incubate new ideas and business ventures that will aid in attracting new businesses to our region. The other thing that we're doing is we're in the early stages, the quiet stages of a capital campaign. Like I think a number of my colleagues at the comprehensive system, we've all had capital campaigns in the past, but we all recognize that we have to do this at a scale that's much different than what we have in the past. There are challenges to this because while we have about a quarter of our alumni make some sort of financial contribution to our foundation every year, it's in small amounts. We have to change the culture, and many of them of our alumni don't realize the dynamic for funding our programs has changed so significantly. The focus of our capital campaign will be in two major areas. One, because affordability is important, we want to increase the endowment that supports our scholarships. Right now, our foundation provides about 600 scholarships a year, and the average scholarship is about $600. With this capital campaign, our ambition is to double the number of scholarships that we can offer to about 1,200, and to double the size of the scholarships that we're able to offer. The other focus will be on capital expansion. It's not been the norm on our comprehensive campuses to support capital improvements at a large scale through philanthropy. I think that has to change. One of the things that we have to do is to learn from our flagship school, here in Madison, that those private philanthropic dollars can make a huge difference, not just with support for our human capital, but also our physical capital. Finally, on this front, even though we're a STEM school, we have not done the job that we could in attracting outside grants and contracts. So we're changing that. We're ramping up our grant writing efforts and encouraging our faculty and trying to find ways to find release time that will attract the resources that business, industry, state, and federal grants can bring to us. So, what are some of the challenges that we have? Well, I don't think that any of the regions will be surprised at the first thing I talk about. Our compensation is lagging behind all of our peer institutions, and if the University of Wisconsin-Platteville is not faculty average salaries is not at the bottom, it is close to the bottom in the system. That presents a real challenge. Now, we haven't had a flood of our intellectual capital leaving to go to other places, but we have had significant retirements, and we are struggling with attracting new faculty in the positions that we are in desperate need. In industrial technology, to give you a sense of what the problem's like, one of our graduates that walks out the door today makes more as a starting salary with a bachelor's degree than we are offering to hire PhDs to teach them. Now, nobody gets into higher education to get rich, but that dynamic presents a real challenge to attracting the kind of teaching talent that we need on our campuses. We are engaged in self-help by the careful husbanding of our own resources and making strategic efforts to add campus-based resources to aid in meeting this significant need. I would say to you the scale of the problem is one that we cannot make a significant dent in without support from other sources. Some other challenges that, and as with all challenges, they create opportunities. We know the state funding is limited and that it is not likely to be something that we can count on remaining at the level that will sustain us or enable us to thrive. And so we have to find other ways to do it. Because of our commitment to access and affordability, we don't have much of an appetite for ever-escalating tuition for our students. Our students come from humble origins in significant numbers, and they just cannot afford continuous hikes, significant hikes in tuition. So we're doing other things. The system has supported an efficiency study this past summer that has indicated ways that we can reorganize information technology, improve classroom management. On our own, we've been making significant efforts to find energy efficiencies, and we've instituted our own program review and prioritization process. To give you an idea of how we're thinking about this, we are projecting over the next 4 years that by our own efforts, we can become more efficient and make savings of over $1 million a year just by the way we allocate resources and use them ourselves. In addition, our energy efficiencies have captured last year, we were $900,000 under budget in what we spent in our energy efforts. Now, of course, that balmy winter we had last year probably helped some, but that was still well beyond the norm across the system. What else are we going to, what are the other things that I'd like to see happen? We talk a lot about flexibility. On my front, I think we cannot talk about flexibility without also making our various constituencies aware of the fact that we know those flexibilities come with accountabilities. The legislature has listed a good number of those. For ourselves, I think we have to be attentive to our graduation rates. They have to get better. Our retention rates must get better. It does not serve our students well if we do not drive the opportunity that we offer to them to a good result of them leaving with degrees and good paying jobs. We also know that we have to be held accountable for the way that we engage in economic development, both locally and across the state and in the country. But with that, I think we also have to understand, as Ames McGinnis told us on the task force earlier this year, or been over a year now, about this time a year ago, that our governance structure should worry most about telling us what they want us to be accountable for and leave it to us to figure out how to accomplish those things. I'd like to highlight a couple of, I think, successes driven by our own innovation in Platteville. Because of the visionary leadership of David Marquis in establishing, my predecessor David Marquis, in establishing the Tri-State Initiative, here are a couple of examples of ways that both the Tri-State Initiative is helping us and the creation of that has driven successes on our campus. Olsvik Hall, for those of you who visited the campus recently or were on campus a year and a half ago for the Regents meeting, was held in Olsvik Hall. That was something approaching $26 million project. More than 50% of it is being paid for by Tri-State Initiative dollars, and over 60% of it is being covered by campus-based resources. This is a way to leverage the state contribution to support for these projects into good results on our campus. In addition, we have the new engineering hall, which is about 3.5, almost 4 years old, and you can see there over 50% of the cost of that building is being funded by campus-based and program revenue gift dollars. It is a way to leverage the support that we get from the state and to help control our own destiny. A couple of other examples. When I arrived in Platteville just over 2.5 years, as you can imagine, as a new chancellor, there are a lot of people who parade into your office with various concerns and demands. I had 4 neighborhood groups meet with me in the first 6 weeks that I was on campus, concerned about our students taking over the town. More than 50% of the residential housing in the town had turned into student rentals. That creates all sorts of issues in the community. As Vice Chancellor Denherter mentioned earlier, it also presents challenges for our ability to have the educational outcomes for our students. So I turned to Vice Chancellor Kramer and said, "Can we build a residence hall?" He says, "Of course we can." And I said, "How soon can we do that?" He says, "Well, maybe 3.5 years." And I said, "Well, that doesn't appear to me like that will work very well, that we're putting this off that long." And so we put our heads together, we looked around, we came up with a different way of doing it. Here's Roundtree Commons. We broke ground on that building on June 29th of 2011. And we opened it, and it is inhabited by nearly 600 students this August, so 13 months, 600-bed facility. We did it at 20% less cost than a typical state residence hall project, and we did it in about a third of the time that it usually takes to do that. Other advantages of that. This building will pay for itself. If it needs a new HVAC system in 10 years, the Real Estate Foundation has in place the financing to make that happen. Its day-to-day maintenance is funded through the rent that the students pay to stay there. That's not the case in the way residence hall projects have been developed historically on our campuses. I think all of that is a good thing. And it's paying off for our students. We have waiting lists of students who want to move into this facility. The savings we had in building it. Now, I always like to talk about my son, who goes out of state to a school and stays in a residence hall about the same style with the same amenities. I'm paying $2,500 more a year for my son to stay in that facility than what our students are paying to stay in this facility. There are ways to do these things that are win-win-win-win. And this is precisely the sort of flexibility that we need to get good results in our system. I would be remiss if I didn't admit that the system support and David Miller were instrumental in helping us figure out how to do this. And identifying the city of Platteville and their city council and working with us to make this happen. So it was a collective effort to make this happen. But it's precisely, I think, the kind of things that I think the Regents and this state should be excited about seeing our campuses do. We have another residence hall under construction. Without quite the same amount of flexibility, so we won't see exactly the same savings. But I would urge the Regents to work with us to build these new flexibilities in to allow these sorts of projects to happen, to worry less about process and more about outcomes. We've made a lot of progress over the last 2 years. There's been a lot of drama associated with making this progress and getting some flexibilities. I thank the Regents and the legislature and the governor for the flexibilities that have been passed along. The block grants, the personnel system that we'll be talking about later, the capital planning, procurement, and travel regulations, those are all good things that are in the works. I liked Chancellor Ward's observation that we have to keep a public purpose to our universities, but we have to find new ways to support it. We need more flexibilities, not less. We need to continue to work with all of our constituencies, the legislature, the governor, our students, our governance system within the university, to get comfortable with the sort of flexibility, nimbleness, and accountability that will make this system and my campus a better place and enable our students to have the success that we want them to have. Our next steps will be proceeding to address the goals that we've set for, keep moving on here, for our strategic plan, to continue to implement our master plan, and to look forward to the opportunity to be held accountable for the results that we produce on our campus. That's the end, and I'm happy to entertain questions, concerns that you might have.
Thank you. Thank you, Chancellor. We're talking all day, apparently, about out-of-state residents. You are, with the Tri-State Plan, at what number, and where do you see that going, or where would you like to see it go, or give us a little platform.
We have about 1,500 students in the program now. When it was established, the goal was to ultimately get to 2,000 students. I think that's about the right number. To maintain the ratio that's been established now, we'd have to continue the rise in residents also. I think that's doable. That means the overall enrollment would probably land at about 9,000, 9,500. I actually think we could get bigger than that over the next 3 to 4 years. I don't think we can sustain enrollment at that level over the longer term, so it's better to moderate it and be strategic about how we go about doing it.
Regent Drew.
Regent Whitburn and I had the opportunity to be on campus the same day as the career fair, and we were impressed with the respect that the employers have for Platteville and also for the opportunities for the students. You should be congratulated on your positive direction, your increase in enrollment, and the key role that Platteville plays in the economy of that region, that southwestern tri-state region. I was interested in the way that you framed the compensation issue. Never really thought about it that way before, that graduates could be making more than actual PhDs that you're recruiting. And my question would be, if there is no relief on compensation, where do you see things going? And I know we heard from your faculty some of their concerns about the compensation. A lot of the senior faculty they're there, they're not going anywhere, but I think maybe the question is more what's going to happen in the future when the senior faculty leaves.
That's going to be a big problem, a big challenge. We will do what we can locally. I think one of the flexibilities we need is the ability to sort of have more control over our compensation plan. Right now, even if we have campus-based resources to commit to that, we're kind of confined to the provisions that are out there already. So we need the support of the state on this front. I think if it doesn't come, what I would do is revisit all of our strategic planning to figure out a way to address it, because it can't be left as it is. It just won't work. It'd be a disservice to our students and to the future of the university.
Chancellor, as the fastest growing campus in the system, I know that you have issues dealing with how to accommodate those new students that are coming in, and particularly those who want residence facilities on your campus. You've done some good work in that area. You have some new residence halls. I'm curious as to what the demand is for those rooms
what you project over the next 3 to 5 years, what you think you're going to need in the way of new residence halls, and what percentage of your freshman and sophomore classes stay in the residence halls?
Well, with the addition of Roundtree Commons this year, almost 100% of our freshmen and sophomores are in campus-related housing. We actually think that if we'd had the second one ready, we probably could have filled it this year. The challenge is a little bigger than that, though, because we have, like the rest of the system, even the residence halls we have in place, the stock that we have is in desperate need of either refurbishing or replacement. And the style of them presents a challenge. We've engaged a consultant that's given us some idea how to approach this. Right now, with the addition of Bridgeview Commons, I'm confident that if it comes online next August, we'll still be able to accommodate all freshmen and sophomores on campus. But then we still have this looming problem out there of the other older residence halls, not being both just a lot of deferred maintenance, but also not being in the style that appeals to today's 18 to 22-year-old. So we'll have to think about what the next step is. The other challenge for me is, and for our campus, is how do we do it? I don't want to hamstring a future chancellor with the same deferred maintenance issues 20 years from now. The notion that also campus money, all money should be green. Right now, the way the things that are set up, the revenue that we get from the older stock would be a disincentive to invest anything in them because they're sort of cash cows. Okay? I'm not real excited about that because we can't spend that money on other urgent needs. So the dynamic of how do you build these? Do you build them in ways that you have some control over your destiny? Do you build them in ways that you're able to maintain them? I think the obligation of all of the chancellors is not just to think about today, but what's the position that the students are going to be in 10 years from now, 15 years from now, that kind of thing. Is that responsive?
All right, anybody else? Regent Roberts.
Change the subject a little. You're talking, I think you said like 75% of the students take 6 years.
Yeah.
Is there any information? One of the things that's developing that we're concerned about the country is student debt. Is there any relationship with debt to the number of years it takes? For example, I'm wondering if debt goes up because it is 6 years, or if it goes down because it's working and it takes 6 years to get through.
I think it stays about the same either way. The message that we have to get to the students is that the opportunity cost that's lost by extending your time in college. Okay? I mean, we still have, our average debt is still, for our students, is still under $25,000. So, one of the things I would say is if you can keep the debt the same and graduate in 4.5 years, you're in a much better position to walking out.
What percent do you suppose of the 75% then taking 6 years are doing it because they got to work?
Almost all of them. I mean, our population of students work a significant, 20 hours a week, an amazing percentage of them.
What was the probability that would go up?
It would go up marginally. But the other thing we can do is a lot of them work off campus. If we can find ways to get them working on campus, we know the more likely, the more engaged students are on campus, even if it's work, the more likely it is that they will graduate on time. There's an employer in a nearby town that has a bus that comes about this time of year and takes 50 or 60 kids up there, and it comes at 3 o'clock and brings them back at 11. Okay? how likely it is it that those students are going to be engaged the next day in class by the half-hour, hour travel time it takes to get to and from them. If we can find ways to employ them on campus, there's a way to do that. If we can get them to, if we can set up a summer program where they can get a full semester's credit by staying on campus for the summer, and we can provide employment opportunities that allow them to offset their costs, give them discount on housing. But we have to be more creative in the ways that we get our students to their degrees. Recognizing the challenges in part that almost half of our students are first-generation college students. Okay? When I went to college, it would never have occurred to me, because there were people all around me that had been to college, it would have never have occurred to me to take 4 years, more than 4 years to finish. Now, a lot of students come in with the idea, well, you know, it's going to take me 5.5 years. We have to break that cycle.
Milner.
One quick question, but let me give you my real question. The quick question is, I didn't catch the average debt, and give it to us again, please.
It's a little less than $25,000.
All right, good, thank you. That's less than I heard. The question, when I visited, one of the comments that I heard from the students is that there's a tendency for the students to go home on the weekend, that there's not the full week and the full participation. And my personal experience was you had a much better chance of getting through 4 years if the students were totally engaged in the campus. And my question is that, do the new residence halls and the amenities or the comforts or the different way of living that the students have in the new residence hall, do those help with that tendency of students to go home for the weekend, or is that economically driven?
I think anecdotally, just my observation going in and out of town and seeing what the parking lots look like, I would say it has helped. It has helped when there's been stuff going on campus that attracts them. And this is another thing we're being very intentional about, getting them engaged in activities on the campus. I mean, from silly things like, you know, making them eligible for a lottery based on the number of campus activities they engage in. Okay? By having all the freshmen and sophomores on campus, it gives you the leverage to break that cycle. If you're an 18-year-old freshman and you're living on the other side of town in Platteville, you can compartmentalize your college experience. So I don't think there's any question that getting them all on campus gives us at least the opportunity and the leverage to have more influence on where they spend their time. And we'll see. I mean, one of the things we have to do is look at what the outcomes. You know, in a year or two, we'll see if that's having a significant impact. I mean, this is the first year that we've had, I think, the capacity to have all of our freshmen and sophomores stay on campus. Before, it's only about half of them.
All right. Thank you for that excellent presentation.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
We have reached our time for lunch, which is right on this floor and right next door. And see what your committee's at 1 o'clock.